Hello, welcome back, everybody. We're here. North American group stages for the Starforged Legends season of the Shadowverse Open begins now, right now. Now is the first week of the group stages. We saw Europe yesterday. Today is going to be North America. I'm Rainy. That's Exodium. Joining us, of course, is Mofu Mocha. Now, apologies for the slight delay. There was a technical difficulty with Envy, so Mofu is kind of sitting in until we can kind of figure out if that's fixed. So, sorry for the slight delay, but thankfully Mofu has graciously stepped in and helped us out, and we'll see how the day goes. I'm excited for North America. How are you guys feeling?
Are you kidding me? Yesterday was awesome. Today's gonna be awesome. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I'm super ready. Yeah, let's take a look at the format to see the bigger picture here. We've gone through the qualifiers, done. We've gone through the Contenders Cup, done. We found 3 people from North America going to the World Grand Prix at the end of the year, going to Tokyo, Japan, and now we're in the Invitational stage, so this is the proper season for the Starforged Legends of the Shadowverse Open, which means that the format is a little different. We're going to be playing a round robin. The players are going to be playing head-to-head matches with every other person in the group. That means that they are going to be building decks based on the players they are facing, not against a greater bracket, which means we're going to see a lot more personalized deck construction and some things that are actually very geared towards what they've researched and identified are their opponents' personalities, play types. So we're going to see a lot of interesting stuff. I'm really excited to see what these players have to offer today, but they're not playing for nothing. There's some prizes on the table, which means that there's some winnings to be had. Top 6, which is top 3 from each group, Group A, Group B, will move on to the regional final stage. The 4th place from each group will get $250. All the competitors will get the Starforged Legends Top 12 Flare. And then in the regional finals, that's where the cash prize is won. First place, $6,500. Second, $3,000. Third, $2,500. Fourth, $1,500. And 5th and 6th. There, happy Exo. $6,950 in the Grand Champion Flare. I did it. I included the 3rd letter of that word. Thank you. Thank you. So they're gonna, there's a lot of money on the line. Let's take a look at the matches and what's coming up first today. Lest versus Mana Surge's Red. Now these are 2 players that have been around for a long time. Mana Surge Red making a big splash in Season 3 and have had a lot of great success, just barely not making the cut for the World Grand Prix, but he's still playing strong. He's going to be a strong competitor. He has a very good kind of deck building background for himself and plays only the most consistent. We've got Gengar versus Eplicus, Fantasy versus Bottles, a team fight right there. And then we've got Underwear versus Vetu, Hackterox versus Jay-Z, and Piao versus Care Package. So that is our schedule for the day today. 3 matches from Group A, 3 matches from Group B. There's a lot of stuff. Now, yesterday was real fast-paced. People were playing a ton of aggro. I mean, if we're going to talk about kind of the overview of the tournament meta for the day, it was very aggressive, and that kind of was the name of the game. Blood was everywhere. Dragoncraft was quite rare, in fact.
Right.
And there were actually a lot of forest decks as well.
Most of them got banned out, though, unfortunately. Yeah. They're too strong, apparently, and nobody wanted to face them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm kind of excited to see across today, kind of looking at the trends for the deck lineups. Let's focus in a little bit on Lest versus Red. So this is going to be interesting. They're the decks that they've submitted. And if we're looking here, we see a forest deck making its way through. So Lest seems pretty confident about that. But Bloodcraft is the one that's going to be banned, and Dragoncraft is going to be available. Meanwhile, on Lest's side, it's going to be Rune and Haven. Let's talk a little bit about the overview for the decks here. Rune Haven is a combination that we've seen quite a bit, and I think most of the reason for the Haven pick is against Rune. How do you feel about these lineups, Exo?
Realistically, I think the entire meta today slowed down. I think they take a lot of weight on what happens in the EU side, then they bring it over here. They saw a lot of aggro, so they wanted to be prepared for that. And realistically, I think Lest is bringing the same deck that we saw him play before, as Tempo Aether List, which is a really fun list. As a matchup as a whole for these two players, I think it's really just going to come down to tight play. I think they're both matched up very well against each other. I think they both did the correct bans. So we're going to have to see how this one plays out.
Let's take a look at a specific deck, Mofu. This is the one that a lot of people have been fearing for a long time. Now only have to be kind of letting it through, but we've seen the power of it, especially in the World Grand Prix, the power of Shadowcraft. And the card that I want to focus on, we've talked about Ector a little bit in a previous show, but let's talk about Immortal Thane. That is a card that has kind of risen to popularity after Ector's kind of dominant era, and people have always identified it as a strong card, but it's just such a key part of Shadowcraft's identity. Tell us a little bit more about Thane.
I think Thane was a card that actually took some time to become popular, but once people really started playtesting it in tournaments and otherwise, it just became a mainstay of Shadow. In that, being able to put down a Thane, suddenly take control of the board, even if your board was empty up to that point, being able to convert things like Death's Breath or any zombies from skeletons from Prince Catacomb into 2 damage per dead follower. This card is able to progress your game plan so much in terms of how much damage you can deal, how much reach you have, and it gives you a lot of value and defensive power afterward when it drops a 0-cost White King when it dies. I think this card is like a 1-card jack of all trades that can do really anything for the class, and I'm happy to see it in a lot of Shadow lists lately.
It's certainly a lot of stats, and incidentally, we did speak to Les. He didn't get it wrong. It is he titled his deck Default Havencraft, and he did that to be he did that to be tricky. Apparently he wanted to confuse people, which, you know, yes. Anywhere you can get a win, you know. The metagame is just as important as the actual gameplay itself. But we've talked a little bit about mid-Shadow lists overall, but is there anything stand out here that you can see about the cards supporting this deck that's worth mentioning, Exo?
Absolutely. This is kind of like a hark back to the old versions of Mid-Shadow. Not old, but like the last season, essentially. Odile's back in for possible mirror matchups, and we see 2 Cerberus over the Blade Fiend, along with a Phantom Howl to push against control decks. He possibly identified that today was going to be a slow metagame, and he picked right, and he's got the cards to help him beat the control matchups.
And you talked about Phantom Howl a lot, right? A lot of people were choosing to exclude Phantom Howl, possibly because of shadows and controlling the amount of necromancy that you use. What are your current thoughts about? Because I know before you were a big advocate of a 1-drop of Phantom Howl. How do you feel about it now?
I always have been, especially in a slower metagame. Usually it's the Cerberus numbers that, you know, ebb and flow depending on how slow you think the format's going to be. But 1 Phantom Howl is just great. It's a good removal option. It kind of takes over that Deathly Tyrant slot for the end game against other mid-range decks, other control decks. It doesn't require you to have 20 shadows. It can deal damage in a pinch even earlier than Deathly Tyrant if you need it to. I think it's super flexible. I think it's a really good way to use shadows if you need to get something done, and that is kill your opponent or wipe their board. So it does it super effectively.
And we'll see if that comes into play for Lest, and they're getting their match kick-started there. So there it is, Mana Search Red versus Lest here, and it looks like the starting match is going to be Dragon versus Rune, which is always very interesting. That ramp versus the possible, and I'm going to assume that he's playing D-Shift because a lot of people are these days. Is it all about kind of the aggressive ramping for Dragoncraft? What is Red looking to do here?
Well, Mofu, actually, I wanted to ask you a question about this matchup. So I know that in the past, D-Shift has always had the edge over Ramp Dragoncraft. Do you think that, after looking at Red's list, that he has anything that can push him over the top to beat D-Shift?
I actually have always found this matchup to kind of be able to go either way, because while Dragoncraft as a class doesn't have very much pressure it can put on early, there is one significant weakness in D-Shift, which is it isn't very efficient with putting up wards. Now, it does run Golem Assault, which is, like, the bodies from Golem Assault are large enough to dissuade things like Forte from hitting face, but that comes pretty late in the game where Dragoncraft has already had a lot of time to ramp. So I think this largely comes down to whether or not the dragon side of things can put on enough damage with Ayala, and then manage to smash face with Forte and things like Genesis Dragon at an early enough time that D-Shift hasn't gotten to its combo yet.
Perfectly said. And I would like to point out that Red is actually playing 3 Fortes and 3 Urds. So he is ready to at least combo, if not just keep going in with Fortes if he can draw enough of them.
Mm-hmm. This is a position I see a lot, or probably every single time I see this matchup. The Ayelas seem to be one of the biggest questions for the side of D-Shift. Just because it's not a Kaleidoscope target, there's nothing in the deck like Petrify that can deal with it without giving the opponent ramp, but it itself can stay on board, especially if evolved or if it makes it that far, as a threat.
Yep, and it's super scary, right? I think a lot of D-Shift players tend to leave it in play until it is evolved, and then they take it out just because they can't afford to keep taking that amount of damage, which I find very interesting. It does slow them down in the early game, but it does get all that free damage off, and we're going to see even more damage this turn. Maybe even play the Forte, but yeah, I would save it for the evolve on the Ayala this turn. But yeah, it's always tricky to play against. You never really know what to do. Because if you ramp them early and they don't have anything, you could just stave off a ton of damage that you would normally take in that spot.
Yeah, that's already 6 damage dealt from this Ayala, which in turn means a single evolved Forte into a Genesis Dragon, if we see that come out later, is already enough. I think the reach offered by this one card can sometimes just define this entire matchup by itself.
Right, which I think is crazy. It's a very unassuming card, and I think we all know the problems with dealing with opposing Ayelas, especially in the mirror. The mirror matchups get really crazy when you're deciding when you want to pop each other's Ayelas.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like from left side of the things, he has a slower hand, but he does have the owl to push him back forward. It's realistically, like you said, can he survive through the course of the next few turns? And I think he has to start wiping the board. I don't think he can wait any longer.
I agree with that. There's a certain point at which the Magic Owls just have to be thrown out, and I empathize with being 13 cards into the deck and not having a D-Shift to be ticking down yet, with a lot of spells that he probably wants to go onto it otherwise. Do you think that throwing things out, such as Chimera or otherwise, to try to get tempo against a Storm Ramp Dragon list like this is going to get him very far?
I like it, and there's only one reason behind it. One, you don't have D-Shift, okay? That's the big reason. The other smaller reasons are, if you start producing threats that Dragon has to deal with, you might be able to dissuade them from just being able to jam Forte and going face every single turn, right? So if you can make them play defensive even for a turn, you can eke out that extra turn, and realistically, because he has no D-Shift, he's got to rely on the giant Chimera that he's got in his hand.
My spear will stop you.
It seems that he decided to hold the Chimeras last turn instead, though, and in turn, he's opened himself up to that last 7 points of damage from the Queen of the Dreadsea with the other Forte and the Dragoon Scyther.
Yep. He doesn't even need to play the Queen of the Dreadsea. That would be overly flashy, and I think you can't actually play both of those after the Queen of the Dreadsea because they're both dragon cards. But those two cards can come down next turn and win the game without an opposing ward, as you said. And yeah, I think Les just waited a little too long. It's always tricky in a matchup like this, but if you can't force your dragon opponent to be defensive, then they can literally do what you see Red doing. Just attack every single turn, throw caution to the wind, like whatever I have to deal damage, I'm just throwing it into play. Plus, he did draw a few of his Fortes and a Scyther, so he did get a pretty good draw in this matchup.
I'm also noticing that there's only one Golem Assault and one copy of Summon Ice Form in Lest's list, meaning even 18 cards into his deck, it's very difficult to make sure he can find options for ward. So all of the storm damage from Red's side is just going face as soon as he gets access to it.
Yep. And we saw it every single turn. After the Ayala turns, it was Forte and Scyther, and that's just exact lethal. Red going up 1 game.
It's a quick matchup for 2 decks that tend to take their time with their plays.
Right. I think Red got one of those fortunate draws. Whenever you're playing Ramp Dragon against D-Shift, you're just like, please draw my Fortes if you're playing them. And Red had no problem with that this game. So now we get to slip into a matchup of Neutral Forest is what Red has left into less D-Shift and Tempo Haven. So if Lest can manage, which I believe he'll probably switch to his Tempo Haven list here, if he can manage to win this, he's got to beat Beauty and the Beast with his D-Shift deck.
I haven't really seen Neutral Forest and D-Shift face off that often. It seems to be another one of those strange matchups to me, where in theory, a card like Beauty and the Beast just crushes a list like D-Shift that is so heavily reliant on spells to remove things from board. But at the same time, turn 6 is now considered the late game in D-Shift's game plan.
That's true. That's true. If you get perfect D-Shift, as Envy actually spoke about, it can go off as early as turn 7, especially with Magic Owls or multiple Magic Owls and things like that. So I definitely agree with you. In practice, though, we have seen Beauty and the Beast pretty consistently take out D-Shift, if they get it.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is actually a matchup, before we get to see that one, that I'm not really particularly familiar with. You said you like seeing things like this sort of Haven list, the kind that runs a lot of Storm, that runs
This is
Taurus
my
as well.
favorite Haven list at the moment. This is literally my favorite Haven list. Aether of the White Wing with Taurus top end. You've got Moon Mirage in the 6-drop slot to get more aggressive with the list. This is a matchup that's really heavily going to rely on the tempo that Les can push. Fortunately, he's against a neutral Haven deck that sometimes can't put up a lot of defenses, Hector being the big thing that they can do, which Red does have access to. But if Les can push enough early damage in, then the Tauruses, the consistent Tauruses in the late game, can just push this matchup over the rails.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the general decision-making process behind the turn 2 on when playing a tempo Haven list like this? I know that this sort of deck always runs a lot of 2-drops. It has, as you can see, Lyriel. It runs like techs like Frog Cleric, Heavenly Hound, Princess Snow White, and Area. But when we see a lot of these in his hand like this, what inspires him to go for the Area first into the Snow White later?
Realistically, I think he doesn't need to trade right now. And he wants to save cards like Lyriel for the Evo turns. Snow White isn't really going to get a lot of value off of the board at the moment, especially on the draw. It's kind of slow, and you can get a lot more tempo popping the Aria faster. I actually would have liked to see him play the second Aria here as well, because you're not really worried about the aggressive side from Red, and he has Lyriel coming up next turn that he could play alongside of the Snow White and kind of take over the board from that point, with the Arias already ticking down. So I think he kind of went half and half here. And I would have liked to see both amulets instead.
Something I just noticed about how Princess Snow White can affect the early game, although it caused Red to have to react to it pretty significantly, I think another part of playing it early is getting that 1 tick of damage that Lyriel can then combine with her Evolve effect to finish off. But Red played pretty specifically around that, perhaps not even seeing the Lyriel, but just wanting to get rid of the Snow White.
Right, and honestly, with open deck lists, you can do things like that. I mean, if your opponent makes a bold move, like just playing a Snow White into your board, you know, you got to be thinking, what can they do with that? If Lyriel's the best possible option, let's just make it not an option. And I think Red made the correct read there and positioned himself to not have to deal with Lyriel.
Mm-hmm. With that said, that still opens up 2 lines of play to Lest here. He could still go for the Lyriel and use that to bounce onto activating the Heavenly Hounds effect. Or here's a card that I actually heard you say you liked a lot previously. I can't remember when, but Birdkeeping Disciple. I remember that earlier in Tempo Haven there were decks that would completely drop Priest of the Cudgel for this, and I think that Lest is actually running both as full playsets of 3. Now,
he is.
How do you think Birdkeeping Disciple changes up this deck list from before?
So Birdkeeping Disciple, realistically, just it's a power play, right? Like on turn 4, whenever you're playing a tempo deck, if you're playing Priest of the Cudgel, it never feels good to be on the play with that card. It just never feels good at all. Birdkeeping Disciple is good on both the play and the draw, and it preserves what you're trying to do, which is keep tempo on board, keep more things in play than your opponent. He decided to run the full suite of both. I think that's fine. It's kind of like tuning your sword deck to be running Genos and Floral Fencers. I've never really been a big fan of that, but that's a consistency on turn 4 thing that some players really like on their Evo turns. For me, if you're playing cards especially like Lyriel and Hound, I don't think you need that many 4-drops. But it's all preference, right? It's just what you like to see in your opening hand and in the mid game. So.
Right. Pretty fortunate, I think, to then also, alongside the consistency of having a lot of 4-drops, I'm noticing, at least in the past, I remember Haven usually had a bit of a hard time finding something to do on turn 5 right afterwards. Birdkeeping Disciple giving you a later play with the Pinion Prayer ticking down was pretty nice. But here, I think, we see Globe of the Starways as a 1-drop that can follow alongside any of the 4-drops, which develops something on the turn you play it is also a really interesting thing about this deck.
Lest actually has a different read on the metagame. So we saw Odile in his Shadow list that got banned. We also see 2 copies of Ancient Lion Spirit in his Haven deck, so he's really aware of like this mid-range thing that's going on, and just he wants a lot of board clear. I think it's kind of an interesting choice with Aether of the White Wing. It just gives you a nice little toolbox kit in your deck to be a little bit more defensive on turn 6 with Aether and a little bit more aggressive on turn 7 with Aether to pull the Moonal Mirage. So I think he's kind of tempered in every single slot in his deck. You know, he's got the Priest, he's got the Bird Keeping Disciples, and then he's got the Ancient Lion Spirits into the Moonals, into the Taurus. So he knows how to play his deck, and that's why it's built this way.
Now that you actually mention it like that, this is a really interesting type of list. Usually, in the old days of Tempo Haven that I think most people are familiar with, the slot of Aether of the White Wing and the entire deck building dynamic was just around figuring out how much damage you could get in with Garuda. But the entire follower lineup has just completely transformed around Aether of the White Wing.
I just like it. Like, Haven feels so flexible now. You can do pretty much anything you want with it. You can be completely defensive with Aether. You can be completely offensive. You can take a lest approach and kind of go half and half, depending on how you want to play the deck. It just opens up everything for Haven. It's literally my favorite card that came out for Haven in the new set, and maybe for Haven in the entire game so far, just because of what it opens up for Haven.
I actually agree with, like, I haven't really put a lot of thought into this before, but I remember there's a history of Haven legendaries where all of them tend to be some sort of a variation on an attempt to make Skullfane into something else. That being like Eidolon or Heresy's Avatar or something like that. But Aether really just drops down this very, very simple effect, really. Not hard to understand at all, yet it just creates its own entirely new archetype.
And that archetype can be whatever you want it to be, kids. So get out your Aether of the White Wings and start building your toolboxes. Alright, so here Les is actually kind of on the back foot. However, if he can manage to push past this, Red doesn't really have a lot of gas to back up anything. He's just got a bunch of 2/2s left over.
I think the value of those 2/2s is pretty high at this in this kind of position, though, where they're both clean of evolution points. I think this Moonal Mirage is the last immediate threat that Lest has, unless he draws something else. And Red has still a pretty enormous life advantage on him.
That is true. And these Beast Call Arias, like I said, not playing them early, this is kind of the situation I never like to be in. Especially against a slower deck like Neutral Forest. I don't want these to be stuck in my hand, because now they're just going to sit here. They eventually might see play, but they're not going to affect the game in any relevant time frame, unless Les can find other cards to kind of push the board control in his favor. Which he just did draw some pretty nice cards.
That he did. Black and Scripture are able to fight against the onslaught of 2-drops on red side, but so if you're Lest here, because I'm not really a professional Haven player much, I've only really picked up the class recently because of Take-Two. Something that I think a lot of people approach this class and are not sure of is, if these Beast Call areas haven't been dropped in the early game, you're in a position like this where you're ahead on board but you need to be reactive. In what kind of circumstance are you actually able to get any value out of them? Do you expect him to be able to play them this game? Looks like he goes for one of them.
Realistically, the only way you can play them is how you see Les play them at this point. It's, I can deal with as much of the board as I possibly can, but I need to get these Beast Call Arias out so that they can have value at some point. It's just tough. It puts you in the spot you don't want to be in the first place, but you have to get them out.
You will get a pretty fair amount of, or at least I'm noticing at least the amount of impact that a person can get off of the average follower or spawn of followers, even Amulet ones, decreases a lot when you're in a late game position like this, where there's no evolutions left and everything is being played for its stat line if it has an evolve effect like Priest of the Cudgel, which is just no longer relevant. So even just the 2 damage that comes out of Beast Call area is going to be very important. But I think he's in a position where he really needs that kind of immediate impact soon, as the Moonal Mirage and Taurus, I'm like wincing in pain watching those trades. Having to trade like all of his reach into just a single beauty in the beast.
Wait a minute,
So
Taurus
it's like
dies there? Hold on. I've got a question about this. I thought Taurus didn't take damage on the crackback.
It's that Taurus will deal damage equal to its attack when it attacks, but because Beauty and the Beast doesn't take damage from effects, and that's still considered an effect damage, He actually just ate that full hit from
That's
Beauty
right.
and the Beast.
That's right. Interesting interactions. I don't think Les knew it either. I think Les was like, he probably did know it, and then he just saw the flood of, 2-2s. This is another situation where, again, Priest of the Cudgel's a little off for me, because when the Evo points are gone, it, again, doesn't do anything, whereas Birdkeeping Disciple still has value. But, as we see, Red is going to take this game, and he gets a point added to his score, doing everything he possibly can to BM Lest here.
Everything he possibly can. And Lest given the dying taunt as he drops that game. So Mana Surge Red going up 1-0 against Lest here. Let's go down 0-1. Something I want to mention, Red always has a very good read on the meta. It seems to be the thing that he keeps up with the most. And I feel like his decks were very well tuned for that, right? Aggressive lists, brought it back to just simple Stormhaven, right? Got the good draw on it. And then his Forestcraft deck just got on the front end of the momentum, and I really think it was a double Hector's, right? Hector is just such a devastating card.
Hector is, I think, the best card in neutral for any type of control game plan now after all the Ala shenanigans are gone and stuff like that. And I feel like if you don't draw Hector, it rapidly changes the pace of the game. But with Hector's, it just gives you this mid game that's so hard to get around. It can kill so many things by itself.
And, if you thought Halo Golem was annoying, wait until you see Hector. That thing is incredible. But let's get an updated look at the group. And Mana Surge Red will be the first one on the board there. 1-0 on the top of it. Notice his competition in the group will be Eplicus, Gengar, Fantasy, Bottles, and then, of course, Les there at the bottom, 0-1. And rough start for Les here, but many more games to come. Something that I want to talk about with the Havencraft list in particular, I mean, he was running Ancient Lion Spirit, Priest of the Cudgel, just so many things that require evolution orbs. Is there any way to kind of trim that or get cards that rely less on that effect? Do you think that that's worth it to investigate? How did you feel about that deck overall?
Well, realistically, it's what we talked about during the match. I don't, in my version of that same list, I don't run Priest of the Cudgel, I don't run Ancient Lion Spirit, and I run Cleric Lancer in the 5 slot instead of Ancient Lion Spirit for exactly that reason. I want my evolution orbs to go face. I don't want to ever have to use them defensively. I want to be able to use my Storm Followers as defense if I need to, or just play optimally on my turns and get more value out of my cards, right? Realistically, it's so hard with Haven, though, because of the toolbox nature of it. You can do whatever you want with it. But Les and some other players can fall into a trap of just playing too many cards that require Evos. So it's hard to say. It's really player preference.
Well, there you have it. The Havencraft list couldn't quite hold up to Neutral Forest, and Les drops a game due to it. But we're going to have to move on here and get ready for the next match. Before we do that, make sure to follow @Shadowverse Game on Twitter. That's where you can get a lot of updates about all the things that are coming up for Shadowverse, any kind of cool events that are going to happen. Also, whenever we go live, there's some announcements about that. And I mean, recently I think there was Paris Games Week stuff going on, and there are a few events across the globe that are happening. So follow that channel and you get all of that. In fact, I think I'm probably going to tweet at that account, trying to see if they'll get me another animated Daria. Rather, not another, but another attempt.
And if you guys haven't had your weekly carrot fix, I'm sure they've got new pictures of the carrot pretty much everywhere they're going, so.
Yep. Well, that carrot is quite frustrating, really. I actually dislike it quite a lot. Oh yeah, the next installment of that carrot series is live, I think, so make sure to look for that commercial if you haven't seen it already.
You're finally going to get banished this time?
We'll see. I don't know if I think I need to find a cudgel for that, apparently, according to the game.
Yes.
Let's talk about Gengar versus Eplicus. Now, here's a matchup that... Ooh, oh my gosh. Eplicus has some expressive picture there. That's a great picture. That's probably one of the best. Wow.
He's got the old rock eyebrows, what he's got going on.
That's right.
That's that Constanza picture.
I like it. So Bloodcraft, Forestcraft against Runecraft, Bloodcraft. And I think based on the styles that Gengar likes to play, it's no surprise that he's going to ban out Sword, which I think is Aggro Sword. How do you feel about these lineups in general? Just kind of a top-down overview of how this matchup will play out. Eplicus is a new member of the season, and I believe a somewhat new player to competitive. Not certain on that. And Gengar has been around for a long time. We've talked about him a little bit, had him on the show a little bit. How do you think this matchup is going to play out?
I'm gonna have to go with not Gengar this time. I usually like rooting for Gengar. The problem is he brought a double aggro D-shift lineup, whereas Eplicus brought a triple aggro lineup. Now, you can literally just ban one of the aggro lists if you're Eplicus and just have a field day on the D-shift deck. So I think Eplicus executed his game plan for the match very well, and I think Gengar kind of gave himself a nice little Achilles heel with that D-shift pick.
A nice little Achilles heel. Let's take a look at Eplicus's Bloodcraft deck a little bit. Now, one of the cards that we talked about that ended up being the Achilles heel to one of the Bloodcraft players yesterday, Fatina greatly taking advantage of that in his match, was Urias. The Levin Duke, apparently, is his title. Urias the Levin Duke. And I believe, well, what is the lore behind this guy? There's some intricate lore, isn't there?
It goes on for quite a while, but to try to summarize this man's tragic story, well, Urias himself is not much of a tragic hero, but he's kind of a madman. So he has backstory with Albert, Levin Saber. He's apparently one of his best friends, and Urias unlocks some kind of strange demonic power that he spends his entire time investigating. He goes off to an island by himself and turns into this weird demonic form that we may see in the future. I hope so. It's got really cool art. And Albert goes off to kill him. And I don't want to spoil how that ends, but the story is resolved. And you can see, I think there's a whole story of it in Grand Blue, actually.
What? Albert and Urias,
it's pretty dramatic.
best friends fighting each other? That's why Sword is banned.
Yeah, Albert, I don't like you anymore.
Yeah. Trying to kill your own best friend? The lore is... Yeah, well, thank you for that. But let's talk about the card. Let's talk about the card a little bit. Super interesting. I'm going to go Wikipedia that after this. But the card...
Wikipedia.
The card, of course, 1-3 for 2, which is an incredible stat line. 3 defenses, very tough to get through. But pinging your opponent for 1 every time your opponent plays a follower. Let's talk about the Bloodcraft deck in entirety. And Mofu, how do you feel about just the state of Bloodcraft and what Eplicus is bringing right now?
I think ever since we lost Ephemera, well, we didn't lose her, but ever since Ephemera got taken back a turn, Council of Card Knights also, I think the crown of best class for aggro is slowly starting to shift away from Sword and towards Blood. Because Blood has had this very consistent, very aggressive, and very explosive aggro playstyle for a very long time that hasn't changed. And so I think lists, especially lists like this one, that rely on bats, even having little extra bits of cheeky burn like Vampiric Fortress, are a lot of players' new answer to D-Shift. And I'm expecting to see a lot of things like this as we go on.
And certainly, we talk quite a bit about bat synergy. Throw the Vania in there. There are a bunch of bat stuff. Now, something we haven't seen in a while is Vampiric Fortress. Is a card that is commonly seen in kind of bat synergistic decks. Where did that card go, Exo? Did people just burn it up? What happened to it?
Honestly, it's always been okay. You know what I mean? Some players choose to throw 1 in their deck. Some players choose to, throw 2 in their deck. Some players just opt not to play it. I mean, there's other cards you can play like Bloodfed Flower Bed as well that just deals, excessive damage over time. Where did it go? I mean, it comes and goes. You know what I mean? Some players like it, some players don't. I hate the card. I never play the card. But I'm not going to say it's a bad card because it can definitely win you the game. I only actually have one question about that whole deck list. He's playing 3 Goblins and 2 Curse Brand Vampires. Probably doesn't make a big deal, but like, come on, man. One of them has an ability, one of them doesn't. You're not playing a neutral deck. What are you thinking?
Goblins are annoying, and they will... It's kind of trying to throw your opponent off, right? He sees the Goblins and like, is it neutral? And it's not. That's a strategy here, I think. So there it is, Eplicus from Disastra versus Gengar, who is still yet to be signed onto a team. Gengar has been not associating himself with a particular organization.
Free Roman.
Yeah, Free Roman. Forestcraft versus Rune. And I guess based on the mulligan, we'll see. Ooh, gosh.
Rainey's getting excited. All right, Mofu, talk to me. So Aggro Forest is a brand new kid on the block. We saw it a little bit when the expansion first hit, but it kind of went away. And now we see it being banned. We see it being played by a lot of people. At least, you know, even both of these players brought it. A lot of people yesterday brought it and it got banned. What do you think about this deck? Why are people deciding to bring this version of an aggro deck as opposed to, say, more aggro sword or more aggro shadow or any of the other classes?
I think that the answer to that question is actually within the question. It is specifically because those other aggro classes exist that I think Aggro Forest has had a chance to roam around and destroy things or matchups in tournaments and on ladder just the same. In that Forest is a class with these two cards he first played are about to be like the central pieces of my answers. It can handle D-Shift really well, thanks to Elf Girl Lisa. It's an aggro deck that does its job. It lets you not lose against D-Shift. But Wood of Brambles also makes it so that you don't necessarily lose the aggro matchup in times when you might go second against it and fall behind in tempo. You have a lot you can do with the additional value of tokens. You're really able to get a lot of flexibility with Aggro Forest in any kind of matchup. Elf Song as well, able to push you into a state of board dominance against almost anything. I think it's an amazing class for this sort of a game plan, and it's no surprise to me that it's constantly being banned.
And Eplicus showing no fear to that Merlin. He says, you know what? Merlin can give you a spell boost. See if I care.
Mm-hmm. The life lead that Eplicus gains off of a hit like that is so huge in a list that runs these Blessed Fairy Dancers, which can really... I didn't really start to appreciate this card until I saw lists like this start to appear, but it can turn a board of about 3 or 4 reach into a board of like 12.
Yeah, and I was expecting a huge crackback here, but of course you don't even need to. Aperia, brand new card from Forest, is basically like a sword card, right? It's Konoichi Master, but it's on one card, so it can't evolve both halves. But it can just sit and play, it deals that extra spike damage, and it allows your Roach to just finish the game off. I think Aggro Forest just has a sweet game plan now.
It absolutely does. It's interesting you mention Aperia in that way, because when I think about it, Kunoichi Master has a lot of 1-ups on the card in being able to send 2 evolved bodies face. The only real weak side being Kunoichi Trainee is a little bit more vulnerable to effects which deal damage to the board. But Aperia is something that Forest has never really had an equivalent to. At most, I think there's a 4-cost card like Underbrush Beast Girl, who you have to play 2 cards in order to activate like this. But Aperia, you see it, especially in a situation like this. It's this huge, difficult to remove spike of damage as you described it, and it can just utterly slash games in matchups like this.
Obliteration! Look at this damage. 6 turn, 14 damage. Ridiculous. And that wasn't even with Roach combo. That was just with naturally played Roach.
Mm-hmm. Like,
unrealistic.
Even just setting it up. And he, like, usually an aggro deck really wants to go first. But getting that extra Evo point and being able to convert it to 7 base damage is just an insane amount of reach for a class like Forest to suddenly have.
And this is where we're at again. Now we're at this place where D-Shift has to be able to beat Blood. And as we said yesterday, Mofu, me and you actually had a pretty lengthy conversation about the place that D-Shift is always in against Blood. Maybe he won't even get a chance to play it, but even if he wins his Blood matchup, he'll have to do that. And it never feels good for the D-Shift player, I gotta say.
Mm-hmm. So, in this situation, do you think he opted out of just playing D-Shift first just because he wants to avoid the potential tilt that it can cause to a player to have to deal with or manage that matchup first? He just wants to see if he has a chance with the Blood Mirror first?
Well, that's always an option, right? Like, give yourself some time to breathe. Like, you just took a heavy and easy loss to an aggro deck with your D-Shift deck. Give yourself a break from it. It could be that, it could be decision fatigue, it could be any number of things, but taking a break from a deck that you just lost with is never a bad idea, unless it's going to cause a really bad matchup for you otherwise, right?
Mm-hmm. In situations like this, I always found deck switching to be interesting on the side of the player who's going to have to win with it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Like, in retrospect, it doesn't really matter, but for your mental state, it could make all the difference.
Mm-hmm. So we do see Urias here, and I'm noticing in the past, Urias, just by having 3 defense, created a really huge problem for aggro decks if you had to deal with him, especially when going second. But I think that's where we see a lot of value come out of Snarling Chains as a card. I think it's Gengar's best option here. Previously, having to commit something like a Razor Claw would be really difficult to come back from against it, but he decides he wants to clear it using a Blood Wolf instead, or he's sending the Blood Wolf base.
That is a very interesting choice, committing a lot of resources and face damage to saving that Snarling Chains.
And what do you think he would be holding the Snarling Chains for in that case? Because that was not a very easy commitment to make there with those trades.
It's not. He takes extra damage by doing this. I honestly think it's just a misplay. But realistically, if I'm trying to get into the mind of Gengar here, I have first Evo. I can control the board with that Snarling Chains if I want to, and we saw him just use it on a 2-2, right? So I think he caught up with himself and realized he could use it for value there. I think it would have been best served on that Urias, but actually, to be honest, I don't know. With the first Evo, it doesn't even mean that you're going to need the Snarling Chains to kill a bigger follower early anyway. So I think he might have just overlooked it as well.
All right, very interesting. But at any rate, I think that he had a lot of very strong lines he could go for there. Snarling Chains, I think, is a really, really strong addition to this list, but it's always scary for me to see it in that, especially in Blood Mirrors, I think the addition of it has added so many cards that injure both players at the same time that even regardless of who gets an advantage on the board early, both players' life totals just drain so quickly in this kind of matchup.
Right. This is one of the scariest matchups to play, period. Every single card, almost, in your deck just deals damage to both players. And you really have... This is like Vengeance Blood, but on steroids, right? Like, when you're playing Vengeance Blood Mirrors, you really have to be careful about setting your opponent into Vengeance, keeping yourself in Vengeance, and just dying outright. In this matchup, it's just a steady life loss, but you have to learn how to mitigate that, or, you know, just figure out how to mitigate that in a given circumstance, to just not put yourself overboard to your opponent's amount of damage that they can deal to you. So this is a technical matchup, regardless, even if it's just an aggro v aggro matchup.
Now, to speak of what goes through players' minds in this matchup, who do you think has the advantage in this kind of situation where Gengar is hitting the turn where he can play Karabos, which is a pretty huge advantage to have, but Eplicus has a really solid domination of the board, with a bit of reach left in his hand with Razor Claw.
Yeah, I think board presence is the most important thing in this matchup. If you can control the board, it's kind of like sword v sword in the aggro matchups, in the fact that once the person has control of the board, Evo points get harder to use. Just dealing with the entire board gets harder to deal with because you really don't have anything that can. You can flood the board like Gengar just did, but you're behind in that scenario. However, Vite kind of changes that. Having wards and being able to Evo to fill the board up even more, I think is awesome. This might be a nice little leveling experience for him. Leveling is the wrong word. Comeback here for him because he has the Karabos to refill the rest of the game, whereas Eplicus doesn't have anything left.
Right. The Razor Claw is probably going to be forced out by the Vite here. Recently, I've seen Vite rise a lot in popularity. I remembered him being cut from aggro lists for a long time, but I suppose it's in metas and scenarios like this where you have to deal with a lot of mid-range and aggro matchups that he just comes back as this. Any card with ward like Vite can be a really strong tool as we see the amount of how much he locks out Eplicus's options here. But also being able to provide a lot of potential value in all the bats he summons, I think just locks him back in as a really solid card in times like these.
That's right. And now Eplicus just not slowing down, though. I mean, even though he doesn't have a lot of options, he has the options that fill his board up, which means that Gengar is either going to have to top deck and have cards that he can win from his hand, which he doesn't yet, or just continue to clear the board and just hope to get his card advantage working before Eplicus can finish out the game.
I think along those lines, we're seeing like more or less the checkmate situation of the Blood Mirror, where Gengar is able to deny Eplicus all of the damage he had on board before, so no top deck is going to do it for Eplicus, whereas Gengar has lethal set up now.
Yeah, especially with the Razor Claw left over in hand. Gengar with the shrugs. I got there. Easy.
And the second Starling Chain.
Yes, and the second Starling Chains. The other thing to be aware of is in this type of a matchup, if you have board control and you lock your opponent down to 2 life, even if you have to sacrifice almost every resource for it, can really lock your opponent out of the game because it stops Blood Bowl from being played, it stops Razor Claw from being played, so you can kind of eliminate cards from your opponent's deck. So, like I said, very technical all the way across the board. How much damage can I afford to deal to myself early? How much damage can I deal to myself late? Should I sacrifice all of my presence to get them down to a certain life total? A lot of things go into it.
It's good on Gengar that he's able to navigate that matchup just fine, but as we said before, I think that was really only the first obstacle he has to overcome. Here's a very traditionally tough matchup for D-Shift. Now knowing, or at least now having a bit more experience playing against this list that he already knew against Eplicus.
Did you just see Eplicus lean back in his chair after that draw? Oh, never mind. Getting there. When you're playing an aggro deck and you don't have a curve and you only have one draw and you top deck it, that feels so good.
I think that's a really common feeling too, considering there's nothing more discouraging than opening the later or top end of an aggro deck.
Wow, Eplicus.
There's so many 1-cost and 2-cost cards in aggro decks to begin with that the chances of just pulling them off the top is already so high, but it still surprises you every time it happens.
Of course, and you saw it in his face every single draw. He's just like, you know what, I'll take it. And in this type of a scenario, I will always take it. Give me the draws, please.
Thankfully, the 2-drop also being Baphomet in a situation like this gives him a lot more fuel to run on, and that no matter how Gengar responds to him, he continues to be able to apply more pressure.
Right, and these Bites being able to, like, the one thing that we talked about a little bit yesterday, but running the Knights, right, the neutral Angels that pump a follower's attack while also providing a ward, kind of gives you that same type of a feeling Bite does, but it gives you value in a different way. Instead of giving you a bat, you get immediate damage and maybe even consistent damage because the ward will protect that follower. So I actually think it's interesting that we don't see a lot of our players using that technique. It's just Bite so far that we know of.
I think previously, or in whatever time that Shadowverse hits a point where a lot of people are still experimenting and we see a lot of aggro mirrors, I think that's really when cards like that get the most attention. Because in situations like this, the best thing you can hope for out of a ward is what we just saw it do against Gengar, and it deprived him of a good or a solid Merlin turn that Eplicus has to react to in any capacity.
And now he's got to deal with an entirely full board, another Evo point left over. If he makes a follower to the board, Dance of Death becomes live. And I think it's his only option. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
This Chimera is definitely going to have to come out, but there's no way for him to advance the Fiery Embrace much further beyond this Beitan, which would have to draw into a 0-cost spell somehow if he wanted to get this Fiery Embrace alive.
To be fair, he's going quick. Gengar's not playing a slow-paced, D-shift game. This is one of those games where, you could potentially go off on turn 7. Unfortunately, he's on the draw against Aggro Blood.
Right. I think the most unfortunate turn for Gengar so far was actually when he had to commit that Merlin into a Bite for lack of better options on how to negate damage from the board.
Interesting. Goes for the Blood Wolf over the Dance of Death first.
I imagine that the Chimera doesn't really leave enough of a living threat that it would dissuade Eplicus from just trying to get as much damage in as he can. Probably recognizes that he sets up Dance of Death regardless, and goes ahead and commits everything remaining but the Dance of Death.
This is scary. I know it's not likely, right? And I'm sure he did the math on it, but you see him crossing his fingers now. He left a D-shift win possible. Essentially just attack, D-shift, win the game. If Gengar had managed to get a D-shift down this slow that fast, it would have been over. I don't think Eplicus did the math with his fingers being crossed like this. He's just praying.
And he's holding it. He's telling us something.
Yeah. So very interesting choice not to do that. I think he could have just put himself into a can't lose situation with the Dance of Death, but realistically, knowing what we know, he'll probably still get the job done.
I think he recognizes that magic missile, no matter how this game went for Gengar, is a sign that D-shift is not going to happen this turn. So we see him take a bit more of a confident expression that he's done this correctly.
Sometimes when you play aggro, you just smork and you forget about everything. I mean, I've fallen into that trap plenty of times. You're just like, wait a minute. Oh yeah, they have lethal. Whoops.
Gosh.
And
I think I also see...
Oh, sorry.
No, all I was going to say is I see D-Shift fall into this situation very often with how fast of a deck it's become, where it's always just... It manages to develop until the very last turn before it ends up eating it like this.
Yep. It's literally every single game. I don't want to keep harping on it, but it's always one turn too slow against aggro blood. And Eplicus taking it like I thought he would with his aggro lineup.
It would be interesting, and it would have been amazing if Gengar had managed to play around the Dance of Death, sacrificing both his followers and then giving them the old Fiery Embrace. But yeah, that's, you know, that's almost an impossible play to make, right? Like, how do you expect that?
I don't even think it is possible because Bloodcraft followers are so tiny.
Yep. Well, it was possible in that scenario because he had the 4/1 owl and then the 4 damage evolved.
Oh, right. Attack across, yeah. Yeah, you're
but
right.
In terms of like actually reading that play, I don't think, because there can be any number of spells that would kill you.
even if you read that play, you don't die that turn, but then you also can't win. So
yeah, tough scenario. And again, that's a story of aggro versus D-Shift. So Gengar unfortunately taking the loss here, and Eplicus on his first kind of match in the round robin, taking it pretty well. And I think, you know, bringing aggro lineups was the read, and he made it correctly and earned the win off it. Let's take a look at the group. Eplicus 1-0 joining Mana Surge red. Gengar joining less down there at the bottom 0-1. That's going to mean the only players left in this group yet to play is Bottles vs. Fantasy, which is our next match. And it's going to be interesting to see how they end up playing out against each other. CBV Fantasy is kind of a player who's been talked about quite a bit and has been very successful. This is his first time in kind of the Shadowverse Open, so we're going to have to figure out, you know, how he plays into this whole scenario. And Bottles, I feel like, has always been a strong player in this season, and just hasn't been able to make kind of that championship performance, right? But he's always been very close in my eyes. Let's take a look at their deck lists here. Bottles very well known for playing Seraph Haven, but he's not bringing it today.
Not today.
Not today. Not today. He's got Forest Dragon with Shadow Band out, and Fantasy is going to be running Dragon Blood. Now, Fantasy's read in the Contenders Cup that led him to great success in actually earning that spot in Tokyo, Japan, was playing very, very aggressive lists. What is the overall strategy that he's bringing today, Exo, and do you think he has a good chance against Bottles?
I think he has a great chance against Bottles, and this is not to slam Bottles, okay? I love Bottles. I've known Bottles for a long time. He's a great deck builder. I think he brought an Achilles heel today. I think he brought a Forest deck that's manufactured from his own brain, his crazy Bottles brain. I don't know how it's supposed to win. I hope he does. But you'll see when we get to the gameplay. But I think Bottles is on the back foot because of his Forest deck and how he built it today. And I think that Fantasy brought strong decks, and he's a really good aggro player. He knows how to navigate turns. He knows how to use his Evo points. I don't think he's going to make any mistakes and let Bottles kind of get away with anything.
Blood is such a mainstay of the current tournament meta right now. Let's take a look at another Blood list, this time with a card that I think has disappeared for a little while. Let's take a look at Soul Dealer in the context of Fantasy's Bloodcraft deck. Now, this is always a very interesting card. It's kind of like a, it's obviously a vengeance-oriented card, right? You're only running it if you really want to be in that vengeance stage, but how do you utilize this? Why would you choose it alongside Belphegor? Why would you choose to use it at all? How do you get away with losing half your health?
Well, I see two reasons here, actually. And I think these two reasons are the only reason why Soul Dealer became popular again shortly after Belphegor also got released alongside it. The first reason is because alongside Belphegor, having 6 copies of a card that allows you to activate Vengeance on turn 4, that will always happen. Soul Dealer and Belphegor both. Nothing in this list, like Blood Moon or anything that would deny you dealing damage to yourself, is extremely consistent and just activates everything in this deck. The other reason we see in the 3-drop slot is Demon Commander Laura. Now, this is actually where Soul Dealer has an edge on Belphegor, and that the combination of these two cards, this being a 3-drop that allows you to give a follower Storm if Vengeance is active for you, gives you an immense amount of reach, up to 8 damage from Soul Dealer on the turn you play him if you wish, just because of his very strange, very aggressive stat line.
And certainly Fantasy is looking to play very aggressive, but even the Vengeance kind of tree of aggression has been less used than the Karavos and Bats kind of version. Why do you think that is, Exo? What are the advantages of each, and why do you think Fantasy has chosen to run this Vengeance variation?
It's hard to say. So regular aggro blood is very easy to pilot. It's very straightforward. You know exactly what it does and what matchups it's good in. Vengeance blood is a lot harder to play. It's very good in very specific matchups, even more so than aggro blood. I feel like it'll have the edge in things like Dragon. Dragon can beat aggro blood pretty consistently if you get your Sybils, if you get your Fervors, if you can gain a little bit of health in the mid game. Against Vengeance blood, Dragon doesn't really do very well, especially this version of it with Laura's. This is like the first iteration of Vengeance blood. This is kicking it old school and just going all in with the Vengeance mechanic. So harder to pilot, more specific matchups, but it does have certain matchups where it's just killer in. And I think he gets to play against that. If I'm not mistaken, he gets to play against Ramp Dragon with his deck. So I think he meted out exactly what Bottles was going to be doing, and I think he's in a great spot.
Ramp Dragon can certainly be very dangerous. Is this a situation? I mean, how do we feel about Ramp right now? I know for a long time, Ramp Dragon kind of had poorer matchups than normal, but it was always a case of, well, if you draw some early Ramp, it still doesn't quite make that much of a difference. Dragon always had a chance. Do you feel like that's true in the current meta still?
Dragon's
that's always been true, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it says in the class description, if you go into single player, in the instructions of what the class does, it tells you to mulligan for Ramp. So I think
That's right, it does say that.
Does it really say that?
It does.
Ramp,
it says make
play
sure
big
you draw.
monsters.
Nice.
Yeah.
I wonder if the other tutorial. What do the other tutorials say? I never. Maybe that's why I'm such a bad Shadowverse player. All of a sudden, now.
Realistically, Dragon is always going to be a presence, right? Ramping is just an unfair mechanic. I won't say unfair into like relevance of the game, just unfair in just the fact that it breaks the rules of the game that you would normally have to play, right? So it's just good because it allows you to do powerful things faster, and a lot of times those powerful things, if you plan for what the board states will be like on the appropriate play points, you can just kind of take over the game easily if you can read the meta properly. So it's never going to be a bad deck.
That's certainly true of the tournament meta for quite a while now. Though there was a time where Dragon wasn't, certainly not the best, right? It was not nearly as strong as it was now. Which
well,
will be
we just had PDK, which, I mean, yeah, that's as far as I'll go there. Yeah.
PDK, PDK is gone now. Rest in peace.
Yes.
I think it. You know, let's take a moment and talk about that a little bit as we're trying to get this game lobby started. We're trying to get the players in the lobby and make sure they're all good to go and have everything that they need. So we'll have to wait for just a little bit. But there are some changes that came in. PDK has its cost increased and its defense reduced by 2. Ephemera had its cost increased by 1, I believe, and then Council of Card Knights as well. So those were kind of the changes that happened like almost a week ago now. But since then, PDK has been a not include in many of the Dragoncraft lists. How do you guys feel about the card? And I guess let's start with Mofu. How do you feel about the changes? Do you think it does deserve to be just removed from the lists entirely? Is there a space for PDK anymore? What do you think?
I think we've actually seen a lot of Prime Dragon Keepers in the ages of past Shadowverse, which is to say, we've always had a lot of cards that have effects like this that clear board and deal damage face at the same time. The very first time we had to deal with it was Grimnir, and thankfully we're not around for that kind of era anymore, or Grimnir's not still doing the same thing. But PDK, I think, where it became absurd with this, is that PDK's stat line was just backbreaking to deal with. It resists or it used to resist every reach of removal. It wasn't attackable, so it was just a part of a game plan that's going to turn Dragoncraft into a Grimnir-like class. Every single card in it suddenly does a mini Grimnir as you play them for a long time. I think the changes have helped deal with that because now you can actually remove it. Now it doesn't really explode and do as much afterwards, but I think that's really helpful in drawing it in line.
All right, well, we've kicked off the match here. Bottles versus Fantasy. He's got Aldos. What a cool guy. Oh my god. Do you have Aldos?
Stop
yet,
talking
Exo?
about Eldos. No!
I pulled a second one recently.
No.
What?
Stop
I have
it,
2
Mofu.
Eldoses.
God. Can I walk off the cast? Is this how this works? Can I just
No,
get up,
please,
throw my
please
mic
stay
on the
with
floor?
us.
Okay,
Please.
alright, I'll stay. Mofu, we're still friends. It's okay.
Okay, I'm glad.
Okay, good.
Still waiting on my turn.
Alright, so let's get into this match. This is classic ramp. Bottles is going with the old polyphonic roar style, whereas Fantasy is going more of the Queen of the Dread Sea, opting... I don't believe he has polyphonic roars in his deck. I think he's just going for more of the combo kill that we've seen in more recent past. But yeah, Bottles, if he can get the play points faster, these polyphonic roars can always be a game changer in this matchup.
Now, Polyphonic Roar as a card has always been really interesting to me because this card has been around forever. I'm pretty sure it's from the Classic set, or from Standard, but I haven't really seen it used until very recently. I think Dragon started adapting it in order to beat or be able to take out the Control Mirror against Haven, back when Aegis was a really popular strategy. Now, how do you feel about Polyphonic Roar? Because I have only seen it just very recently, and I still have yet to make an opinion on it.
So it depends about your late game. So you can build your late game to beat the mirror, because I think he's expecting to beat the mirror in several different ways. Polyphonic War basically starts the Bahamut War and says, hey, if you don't play a Bahamut, then you're going to lose probably. And then if your opponent plays their Bahamut first, you gain the edge. The first person to run out of Bahamuts usually is behind in this sort of a matchup. However, things have changed. It's not like that anymore. We have Queen of the Dread Sea, we have Genesis Dragon, we have Ariat. We live in a world of plentiful combos. We've got Fortes and Urds, you know what I mean? So it's not as big as it used to be, but it can still position the endgame the way you want it. The other thing it can do is with Queen of the Dread Sea, you can play it alongside something else for just massive tempo swing. So realistically, if you can understand your matchups well, Polyphonic War can be a very good tool.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Something I've actually seen, as you mentioned before. I've seen someone play Queen of the Dread Sea into Bahamut, into Polyphonic Roar, and I think that is just one of the single strongest plays I've ever seen come out of Dragoncraft. But in a situation like this, or in a matchup like this, where you know the opponent has 3 Bahamuts, it makes me wonder how, well, I probably am not, this is probably not the game to say this, or I'm not completely sure how effective it would be, but Botals has managed to find a lot of ramp up to this point. I think it's only, what, like turn 6 or so that he's managed to resolve this?
Yes.
He's clearly going to do a lot this game.
Yes. Fortunately for Fantasy, he's managed to ramp himself at least to 10 for next turn. But he's committing a lot to the board to do this. So realistically, he's actually giving up a lot of resources, and he'll have to pop Bottles' Staircase if he wants to get rid of that Roar. Then again, committing a board like this with double Sybil means that it has to be dealt with also.
Thankfully, Bottles had a Breath of Salamander that just cleans that up just right. I've seen people commit 2 Polyphonic Roars before in matchups like these, which goes very much against the using it as a Bahamut bait sort of thing that you've said. But assuming Bahamut comes down, how is Botals going to deal with that now that he has it? Is he just looking for something from this Staircase, ideally a Dragoon Scyther?
He has to hope. That's the plan, right? So if I was Bottles, I wouldn't have even played Rahab here, because I know Bahamut's coming, and if Bahamut's not coming, I win the game anyway. But the Rahab's whatever. It's not a huge deal, but he has to draw something here. This is the one kind of thing that I was talking about. Like, say you play Polyphonic Roar and you bait your opponent into playing Bahamut. If you don't have an answer to that Bahamut, you'll just lose the game. So you have to be careful. But he got lucky with the Staircase. Actually drew 3 different answers to Bahamut, so definitely not worried about it anymore.
Now, we see a single copy of an Odin in Fantasy's list. I think alongside the 3 Bahamuts he runs, he's not really going to need to deal with or take much pressure from these Polyphonic Roars after a certain point. But I think looking at the difference in card advantage going on here, with the only difference in life advantage being Fantasy at full and Botals at 14, I'm actually thinking that Botals has a pretty significant advantage here.
He does, and it really just depends on how he chooses to play the rest of the game out. So if he chooses to pressure Fantasy, I feel like he's in an amazing position. If he does the regular, I'm just going to play a threat, you do something, I do something, it can give Fantasy plenty of time to do something with that Queen of the Dread Sea that's in hand. So realistically, it's all on Bottles here. It's Bottles' game to lose, because like you said, he does have card advantage, he has better options in his hand, he even has another Bahamut if he needs it. So I agree.
My dance quenches the earth.
though, looks like he's not going to opt to pressure, instead wants to make up for the difference in life advantage here, which I find is a really interesting way that a player is forced to play when they know their opponent is playing Queen of the Dread Sea, and that he's desperately staying above about that range of 18, I think it is, health, or 16 even, that dodges a Genesis Dragon alongside Ariad or Erd.
Right. Absolutely. And realistically, Fantasy's not getting any better. That second Queen of the Dread Sea never feels good. That's really interesting. I actually saw Bad do this yesterday, and, you know, I see some Dragon players do it. I'm not even referencing Fantasy at this point. Just running the full combo, right? 3 Queen of the Dread Seas, 3 Genesis Dragons, like, multiple Ariads. Like, they just really want that to be their end game. But realistically, sometimes you end up where maybe even, like, another top deck here would be a Queen of the Dread Sea, and then you're really just not doing anything, because you can't just outright play that card, right? Like, there has to be some kind of a strategy going into that turn.
Before you saying that, I actually never really noticed how much it hurts to have 2 in hand.
Right. Because you literally can't play both of them. It is... Well, I mean, I guess you could. You could pick Queen of the Dread Sea into a Queen of the Dread Sea, but...
Then it discards everything that the second Queen of the Dread Sea would have done in the first place.
Right.
At the very least, not going to need to deal with the second Polyphonic Roar, but Bottles has the full fan of, well, there's a term for this, actually. A lot of Japanese players say this in Japanese streams, for tournaments or even just streamers in general. They call this Pokerverse, where in control mirrors, when one player has this gigantic hand of a lot of really high-cost things, and they just kind of hold it and can only play 1 card a turn. We see that happen a lot in situations like this.
Oh, yeah, especially in Dragon Mirrors. And it all comes down to just, you know, I mean, it could be Pokerverse, it could be Chessverse, whatever you want to call it. It's just, what piece do I move next? What makes the most sense? And realistically, without perfect information, it's super hard. We have perfect information. We know that if Bottles plays Bahamut next turn, he's in great shape, right? But, of course, he doesn't know that, and you never really want to do that. That's never a good feeling, to just play a Bahamut into something that's not another Bahamut, or to clear off something that you can't otherwise normally deal with.
Right. Especially when, for all he knows, Fantasy could have both of his other Bahamuts in his hand. Committing something like that where, I think that's actually, come to think of it, a really unique part of this matchup, which is most of each deck's or each class's answers to a lot of things also mount a lot of pressure on board at the same time. Be it through things like Zeus, which forces your opponent to deal with it, Bahamut, which he very confidently slams.
Baby! So, this is something I'd like to... Oh my goodness, okay. Alright, Fantasy. Good man. What I was going to say is, a lot of times in the Dragon Mirror, people wait too long to play their Bahamuts. The reason I say this is because the longer the game goes with a 40-card deck, the more likely they are to have more of their Bahamuts, right? I'm actually of the nature of, if I'm ahead in play points and I have multiple Bahamuts, I will just start slamming them. Especially if I have Scythers to back up in case that plan goes awry. Just because it gives you the most opportunity to just outright win the game and not go into this stall war late in the game.
I think that Bahamut really just cast the dice on this entire game, where without any answer to a Forte, no way to remove it, he has to put everything on Fantasy, not doing the same trick he just did, not finding his last Scyther, in order to deal with this Zeus.
That's right, and he can Erd it now to get it down to 10 defense and then finish it off if he wants to. Yeah, it looks like this is the perfect time to play this. This will get all the rest of the cards he needs out of his hand. You don't really lose any value from this.
Looks like he chose not to commit the rest of it.
Oh.
He's actually just leaving this Zeus alive and hoping that Botolz doesn't have the reach.
That's very interesting to me. This is basically just saying free 7 damage, and that's not really ever what you want to be doing, I don't think.
Right. Especially leaving Zeus up, anything could happen to the body of Queen of the Dread Sea, and it doesn't get any easier for him to answer here.
Right, and Bottle's taking the super safe route, gaining life, clearing as much as he can, while also that Zeus hasn't been dealt with.
Right, I think also very unfortunate for Fantasy is that reducing the cost of Breath of the Salamander, though I think it was his only choice of a Dragoncraft card in his hand, isn't really, he's not really guaranteed to take advantage of the cost reduction when it has Enhance, and something so beefy as costing 6. So that left him really vulnerable and very dependent on what he drew next. So that really makes me wonder about the decision to just hold things here.
Destiny calls.
So he's got to do it now. He can't wait any longer. Feels bad to give up so many resources for it, but now that he's taken the extra damage, he might just be too far behind to catch up. Especially with Bottles playing safe and gaining the health on the turns that he did.
Right. Making the play for life puts him completely out of the range of anything fortunate for Fantasy, like finding his other Urdens of the Forte.
Right. And I don't really mind Fantasy's play up, except for that one, just because realistically he's out of cards, right? He needs to just figure out a line of play that wins, and for him that might have meant maybe I draw my other Odin, or maybe I draw a removal spell, another Scyther for that, or for the Zeus, so I can just outright win the game. So I don't mind it if that's realistically what he's thinking about, because that's a perfectly solid line of play to think about. If I'm out of options and I can't win the long game, I have to just get lucky. And I think that's what we saw.
And he noticed that Botal's had made or has been playing pretty defensively all game. So he's probably just making that call that if he doesn't hold on to something like that and he just tries to commit everything into that trade, then he just says, I'm not going to win the game anyway. So he just wants to get really lucky in that circumstance and has to take a risk like that.
Right. And I really like the adoption of Staircase to Paradise in like every deck. That card is every time I see that card, I'm just like, wow, that dodged the nerfs, and I'm like, whoa.
Right. I think the only times... Yeah, the only times where I don't see Staircase have an immense impact on a game is only the games where the player who played it didn't last long enough to see it resolve.
Yeah, that's fair. that's very fair.
In fact, the huge card advantage that Botal's has now is largely due to how he was able to use up a lot of his own resources and answers that he pulled off of the Staircase from Fantasy's own Bahamut.
Right. And in this type of a match, Staircase popping is like insane, right? Because if Fantasy had a Staircase popping at some point, he might have been able to come back and play more of the back and forth. But he didn't. Bottles takes this game pretty convincingly. Played very straightforward that game. I liked his level of play there. Now, the real question I have about this matchup isn't necessarily about that game. So if I brought Vengeance Blood and my opponent didn't ban it out, and I know they have Dragon in their lineup, why would I not lead with Vengeance Blood and try to hope for that good matchup?
I think that's actually a really good question. Perhaps Fantasy had confidence that he would have been able to make that happen. Perhaps he noticed how defensive Botal's lineup was and thought perhaps that game could have gone better for him. Perhaps he could have gotten his Queen combo off the way he wanted to, so he could just move on from that and just then work into his Vengeance Blood game plan.
Time to get started.
Which is interesting to me. I always choose to, or at least try to get my favorable matchups in as soon as possible so I can get that one win up, because of course, as we see, most of the time when you win the first game, it's really hard for your opponent to come back unless they really have something that's just a bad deck, like a D-shift deck versus two aggro decks like we saw. But it's just interesting choice. So let's talk about Bottles' deck. I know I spoke a little bit about it. Talk to me about what's in Bottles' Forest deck and why I think it's kind of crazy.
I did my very best to analyze it once you mentioned that this was strange, and honestly, I am not coming back up with much except one thing. I think what Bottles' idea is he wants a deck that never loses to pure aggression. He has a lot of cards that are extremely defensive, reactive, and can give him a lot of board dominance, such as Magical Fairy Lilac, Crystallia Tia, even Jungle Warden as the mid-game ward, and his finisher is some strange combination of White Wolf, which is supposed to pull him one copy of a Silverbolt. If he draws that copy, it's going to give him Elf Queen. So I guess he wanted a bit of non-linearity by running them in ones.
Important to note, only one White Wolf and only one Silverbolt in this deck.
So that's different from when we actually discussed running cards as one-ofs before, where perhaps running them on the back of other things around that cost range, they just want an alternate option. This means he's only looking for one instance of the option to begin with as a win condition.
Right.
The rest of the deck is very defensive. But if he does get it off, I have seen combos before of Silverbolt into
So it looks like Bottles has been having connection issues this whole time. I think we're trying to get that cleaned up, I would imagine.
Yep, I believe so. And gonna wait for an admin decision to see what's going on there. But unfortunately, the internet is a thing, and sometimes
the internet is a thing. Yes.
I wish
Envy got booted out by the internet this morning.
Yeah,
and now
that's right.
Oh
yeah, I forgot about that.
By the internet. Yeah. Not to Mofu. Mofu, you're cool. Hold
on. Get to dodge that one.
Nobody wants to kick Mofu.
No, Mofu's great.
Yeah, Mofu, Mocha.
me.
So actually, this is a perfect question for you, Rainey, because you love playing terrible forest decks. Why?
Great. I like playing really, really good forest decks.
What do you think Bottles should be running on his top end? So he's got 1 White Wolf, 1 Silver Bolt. What would you like to see in there?
2 more King Elephants, 1 more Wolf, a Loki in the deck, and an Elf Queen.
Perfect. So talk to our viewers about Loki and King Elephant and how amazing that combo is.
Loki, well, so we haven't really seen Loki. No, actually, I think there was like 1 Loki like way back when. I don't think it actually got played, which is typically what happens.
I think
with Loki.
maybe with the Giant Chimera is kind of like where you would see it, if anywhere.
Did you know that Loki plays a sick guitar solo when you play him? Did you know that he also plays sick guitar riffs when you evolve him and attack? Also, did you know that Loki makes your fanfare effect happen twice? Also, did you know that once upon a time I accidentally used Loki's fanfare on some really terrible, I think it might have been a, what was it? I was very upset about this. It might have been like an Elf Child May or something like that.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, I had,
like
it was like 10 play points. I had a King Elephant combo, and I played the Loki like way back when, and I forgot, and I was like, I should play this Elf Child May because it wasn't time to play the King Elephant, and then May was like, block, block. I'm like, that's not normal.
No, why did this happen?
That's not supposed to happen. And then I realized my great error. But Loki with King Elephant, so King Elephant is a card that we've never seen here, I don't think, on the Shadowverse Open, but King Elephant says, hey, let's count the cards you have in hand, and that's just the increased damage that King Elephant gets, and Loki just makes it do that twice. So you could get like plus 19 damage or something like that.
500 damage King Elephant, yes, but you have to play Loki first, and then, like you said, not trigger it before King Elephant, so you have to be careful. And a lot of what Forest does triggers those things, right? So you got to be careful.
Make sure you don't use it on Elf Queen either, because Elf Queen will be like, yeah, I'm totally down to heal you, and then you have no more shadows, and it's like, I'm going to try to heal you again, and then you heal for 0. You don't heal for anything. Also, you're probably already at 20, so very sad. I wish Elf Queen had a specific line that said heal more than what you have.
Tia would be pretty cool with Loki, actually. Getting 2 evolved 6/6s, that would work that way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be pretty sweet.
I tried him with I tried Loki with Imperial Dragoon once. I don't recommend it. I really don't. You don't have 2 hands. Let me just say.
Yeah.
I've got an update. So it looks like Fantasy is gonna get a game win, unfortunately, as kind of the hands were revealed and the cards were played. So it's going to be Bottles vs Fantasy 1-on-1 now, and Fantasy can use either of his decks still, just for integrity purposes. Unfortunately, there's not a good way when a player disconnects to kind of resolve that scenario, and we definitely don't enjoy to see this kind of thing happen.
Let's talk about what we've learned in the last 2 days. Make sure that you guys submit your decks on time, and make sure that you guys reset your internet before it's game day, okay?
Yeah. To be fair, sometimes the internet just wants to take a hammer and beat you up with it, and then throw your body into a dumpster. That's what the internet does to me.
Rude, internet. Very rude.
So, Bottles vs Fantasy. Bottles was doing pretty well. Yet to be determined how his Forest Craft list would do. He probably has devised a much better one than what I would have devised, and I'm sure there's a particular strategy associated with this deck that Bottles is bringing, so let's see how it does. He's also using Selwyn, which is a disagreeable choice, but...
Oh really? I use Selwyn. I have to talk to you about that one.
Okay, let's see how these mulligans play out.
All right, Mofu. So I'm gonna go with what you said. I think that Bottles constructed a very anti-aggro Forest deck that has a late game option with the Silver Bolt. I think I would have to agree with that.
Yeah. Even looking at his hand now, you see every option that he's drawn so far has just been straight reactive, and it's gonna continue on this way as we go on. But I think this is a really awkward matchup to actually have to play this sort of deck into, and that a lot of these reactive choices don't really do what he wants them to do versus a deck like Fantasy's Combo Dragon.
Right, and realistically speaking, I don't think that an anti-aggro deck would have been necessarily good against Vengeance Blood either because of how big the followers are. I feel like Bottles' deck clearly is good against small followers and beginnings, or openings rather, but not very good against multiple 4/4s or even something like a Dark Air Jammer and things of that nature.
Right. It shows off one of the big vulnerabilities of Forest, which it isn't really able to clear in wide sweeps. At most, it's able to clear boards with these 2 copies of Will of the Forest he has. It can clear tall with Crystalia Tia, but without something like Cassiopeia, he would struggle in that matchup a lot, and I think the very same problem exists in this one.
Right, just very big followers. And unfortunately, from what we can tell and what we glean from Bottles' deck, is that it's a very mid-rangey deck. And Ramp Dragon preys on pretty much everything surrounding mid-range in that category. So it'll be interesting to see if Bottles can manage to win with this deck. If he does, I would be very impressed, and I would never naysay Bottles again. And Bottles, if you're listening to this later, you know I love you, all right? But I gotta give you some crap sometimes.
I've actually seen Bottles bring a lot of, well, I've never seen him go this far, but I've seen him bring some lists that were really interesting in my past experiences watching him. I think I played against him once in some strange other format, but really, I really like Forest as a class for how much it allows someone to invent new things. It's just, I think, all the brilliance behind this deck is something that we may see it struggle to show off when he has cards like Wood of the Brambles that are supposed to give him board dominance, but he has to make these trades that are very difficult. Like, he doesn't want to pop these Ielas, but that's really all he's going to get, all the value he's going to get off of it against Fantasy.
Right, and realistically, we have seen in the past, and I've seen it in my own tournaments, where Bottles will take what we like to call infinite Tia works, where you have Crystalia Tia, and now you have access to Nature's Guidance, Airbound Barrage, you know, Pixie Mischief was the card of choice before, where you can literally just play Tia nonstop every single turn, you know, from turn 7 onward against an aggro deck, and that can really close out a game against aggro, especially against decks like Aggro Blood that don't really have a lot of ways to get through multiple wards every single turn. It just feels really powerful.
I think that was more or less the primary strategy and one of the most feared things about Forest back when, was Tia Darkness Evolved? I believe she was released right then, and that's when,
yes,
more or less the entire class's mid-game just became doing that.
Oh, wow. And Fantasy just going all in early here.
I think,
Oh, that's lethal, that's why.
yeah, that's it.
Got his combo immediately and found lethal with it.
We were so interested in trying to watch Botals make this happen that we just didn't notice Fantasy
Right.
had.
Drew into it, got it immediately. This is why you play the combo, right? I mean, you get it, you win the game.
Yeah, yeah. Queen of the Dread Sea. That's another card that we should talk about at some point. That card is quite interesting, but as you can see, very, very effective. Genesis Dragon coming down and doing the old 7 damage, 9 damage combo. Gonna close out that game, and probably, you know, as you guys correctly were talking about, the Forest Crafts list best chance was against something aggro-oriented, when you have to cede so much control to Ramp Dragon, and have that dragon ramp maybe, what was it, 3 or 4 times in his hand?
That was quite as perfect as you can get. You had infinite ramp into just the combo and a Bahamut in your late game hand, which is right where you want to be.
Fantasy will take the win. Let's take a look at the group. Group A is done for the day. Red, Epicus, and Fantasy will be on the top end, 1-0 for all 3 of them. Bottles, Gengar, and Les 0-1 in their first week of play. And of course, again, much more opportunity in the future for either of these players to move forward and you know, climb their way back. So nothing too troubling just yet. There's still a lot of games to play in the round robin, but it's definitely not great to start out with a losing game. Make sure you guys go to shadowverse.nge.io to find any information you want about broadcast schedule, about some player information, as well as articles being written about competitive Shadowverse. Cool thing to go and read. Talks about some of the decks that have been played, talks about some of the strategies and deck building and whatnot. So check out the website. Definitely recommend you do that. I'm pretty hungry. I want to go and get some bagels or something like that. So I think we're gonna take a little bit of a break. That's not the reason why. They don't care about me. They actually just let me starve. They don't even pay me. They don't pay me. But we're gonna go to a break. I'm gonna figure that out. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Shadowverse next. And if you guys haven't seen it, very cool stuff happening there. And of course, the tournament will continue. So we will be back in 5. We'll see you guys soon. Didn't get my bagel. Didn't happen. I went and looked. There was no bagel. Expected. I'm starving. Please help. We're back. We're going to talk about Shadowverse next for a little bit. There's going to be some very exciting stuff coming to Shadowverse very, very soon. And some of the coolest stuff, and perhaps what is going to be the biggest expansion that Shadowverse has received. I'm not going to talk about the future.
Has received.
And there's a bunch of stuff, so let's gonna talk through a little bit of them and get some thoughts about them. So first up, there's going to be a new format that players can play and participate in. Very exciting stuff. That's going to be rotation. Rotation will include all cards released in the 5 latest card sets. So that means the most recent 5 expansions. Those are the cards that are available. And there will be select basic cards. So not necessarily all the basic cards, just certain ones. Certain basic cards will be kept, and that'll keep the pool of cards around 500. And this will be aimed to help new players enter into the space and feel like they don't have to collect a library of cards, mountain pile of old cards to kind of keep up with the scene and the meta. Very cool. Also changes the way that a lot of crafts will be played and create maybe new identities and change the pace of the game. So we'll see how that plays out. And then, of course, the current format for Shadowverse Unlimited is staying around. You can choose to play that as well. And I believe in the video they actually talked about how you can play both of them, and they will each have their own individual ladders, and you can actually win prizes from each of them. So looking forward to that. Also, they're going to add in a new kind of arena mode. They were pretty ambiguous about what this would be, but a tournament mode is going to become available for players. And the big highlight points is that anybody can join, and you can play at your own leisure. So you can start your run and finish it at whatever time. And tournament winners will claim exclusive titles and bonuses, and I can only assume and speculate that this will probably have some kind of format. Perhaps it'll be a best of format. Perhaps there will be some kind of deck submission thing that you can do. No clue what it is, but very exciting stuff. And I'm sure a lot of competitive players who are watching this tournament, players who are competing in this tournament are going to be very excited to give that a try. So that's coming down the line, and perhaps the last and most exciting one, Exodium. Why don't you talk about this one? Why don't you talk about this one? This is pretty cool.
Sure. So Portalcraft is coming. A new class is being added to the game. Very interesting stuff. Yuan is our new leader, and he is the Walker of Dimensions, the vindictive contender. Adds few unique things to the game, such as resonance, which I'll actually let Mofu talk about because he's really on board with this new resonance mechanic.
Alright, so this class's main mechanic, or the only one we've seen so far called resonance, means that certain cards have effects that activate dependent on whether or not you have a even number of cards in your deck. So if you do, then resonance is active. If not, it's not. So I think that this is the coolest and most in-depth class mechanic that we've ever seen, depending on what they do with it, but they can do a lot with it. There are cards, perhaps, we can imagine, that could do completely different things, whether it's on or off. And there are a lot of card effects in the game that either add cards to your deck or just simply draw off the top that let you manipulate it. I think it's really cool. There's a lot of space for what they can do with it, and I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, tutor effects, extra draw effects, pulling things out of your deck in any sort of fashion, just lends itself to do amazing things with this class. And it also means that there should be counterplay involved if you expect your opponents to be bringing Portalcraft to become super popular and try to manipulate their deck as well.
And we'll see. I mean, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of ways to do that because that becomes a very kind of a focal point, at least for this particular craft in the game. So we'll see. I'm just excited for them to make a drama where, not saying it would be a particularly original idea, when 2 players are playing and somebody makes a move, and then it zooms in on the other guy's face and he adjusts his glasses and says, "You've activated my resonance." Yeah? Yeah.
Sure, why not? Yes.
Yeah.
Or it's like a power-up thing where like you get a Superman suit on it and it's just like, resonance activated and you're just like, raw.
But the thing about that is it's not like Overflow. It would make sense with Overflow, but with Portalcraft it'd be like, oh, you've activated resonance, and then you draw a card. It's like, wait, let me get out of my I'm not resonance anymore. You have to take off your outfit, and then literally for every card you gotta.
I think that would get kind of annoying, especially if you activated and deactivated several times on the same turn. You know what I mean? Like, become Voltron, and then you break, and become Voltron, and then you break.
He must not live a very comfortable life, I don't think. What does vindictive contender? Is that what it said? Vindictive. Vindictive. Vindictive
He doesn't
is
like losing.
Yeah. Vindictive. What is the actual proper definition of vindictive? I have a general ballpark idea of what that is, but
I mean, I wouldn't know what the Webster's dictionary version of it. I just know I don't want somebody who's vindictive against me.
I would
Yep.
agree with
I
that.
think that's the intended effect there.
Yeah.
Maybe he's a little tsin to his dede. Maybe he's a little bit, on the less nice side. But he's quite
He's
handsome.
friends
I mean,
with
he's
you
kinda handsome,
until
so-
he's not.
Yeah.
Rainey, what was that? He's what now?
He's kind of handsome. I mean, there's no.
Interesting.
You gotta say it like it is. That's lesson in life. Say it like it is. Let's take a look at the. Let's take a look at Group B as we're gonna continue on into this tournament. We've got Underwear versus Vetu, Hackterox versus Jay-Z, and Piao versus Care Package coming up. These are going to be the Group B matches. So we're gonna see some more players here trying to make their way through. Now Vetu and Jay-Z are going to be the two players who are set to move on to the World Grand Prix. They are two of the representatives of North America here, and they're going to play separate matches here against Underwear and Hackterox. So we're going to see how they do. Jay-Z, obviously being the favorite, the two-time winner of the North American Shadowverse Open. He's won Season 1 and Season 2, and he's just an absolute monster in contention for the best Shadowverse player in the West.
Absolutely.
I wonder how many people are kind of, if you feel like, I can't believe he would say that, then come out here, participate in the tournaments.
Beat him down.
And beat him down. Yeah.
That's right.
Just like that.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at the head-to-heads here. Vetu versus Underwear. And take a look at some of these decks. Oh, look at those pretty pictures. We've got Swordcraft, Bloodcraft, so he's just letting it through. He's just, all right, go and hit face. Let's do that. And then Underwear is going to have Bloodcraft and Forestcraft, with Dragoncraft being banned for Underwear and Forestcraft being banned for Vetu. So, how do we feel about these lists and the game pace that is set up here? Is Underwear going to be able to survive with that Forestcraft deck? I know that, the gut feeling, especially since we're coming out of a particular meta right now, the gut feeling is that Forestcraft is a little less stable of a list, a little less consistent. I don't know if you would agree with that. But the way that these players have been banning, and especially in EU, it does feel like it does feel like Forestcraft is a little more dangerous than we would expect. What do you think the read on Forestcraft as a list is right now?
It's tough. When you're talking about neutral forests, it's very specific, and we've talked about neutral forests ad nauseum for the last couple weeks. It's really good in its very particular matchups, and it's kind of shaky in all of the other ones. So where, you're bringing an all-control lineup where neutral forest is one of your control decks, maybe it's not as good against the aggro decks as the other control decks you have, and I think that's why it got let through. What I actually find interesting is that a lot of people are bringing neutral forest these days, and honestly, I don't know why.
We'll see. I mean, we've
Yeah,
seen
we'll see.
Neutral Forest from Red absolutely dominate, so maybe they're looking for
Absolutely.
that scenario. But I want to take a look at one of Vetu's lists, and this is interesting in particular. We're going to take a look at Swordcraft, and it's kind of, it's a Swordcraft list for sure, but they're bringing back a card that has stayed hidden for almost the entirety of its existence, only showing when it's most needed, and that card will be the Vagabond Frog. Tell me about this card, Mofu, and why people dislike this card so much.
Well, I personally love the card. I think that this is one of the coolest cards in the game. I don't like playing against it, but I love frogs. They're like my favorite animal at this point for many reasons. But I think Vagabond Frog, when it used to cost 3, it was absolutely the most hated card in the game. I think its effect right there really explains why. This guy dodges everything, every removal spell, except those that hit randomly like Tribunal. He can't ever be attacked, he just always has ambush. So that's a lot of damage that just always goes down every turn, forever. But ever since he's been nerfed, he's been a little bit slower. It's harder to get that damage in. I'm really interested to see that he's back in a list like this. I think it could be a call against decks like D-Shift or the otherwise that might rely on targeted spells or something like that to try to get rid of things. So perhaps trying to curve Vagabond Frog into Kunoichi Master is part of his late game win plan here.
We'll definitely have to see if that plays out, and Vetu very smartly naming his deck Deck 2. And how does that kind of, especially when I feel like aggro is almost kind of like in this weird arms race where they're trying to figure out, okay, how can we curve out as quick as we can, compared to how do we have enough gas in the mirror match to kind of one up my opponent by playing a little bit slower and a little bit safer to to get rid of all your resources and then come back with enough of a swing to kill you, kind of in that mid-range fashion. Where do you feel like Vagabond Frog in this particular deck fits in that scale, Exo?
Quite honestly, I think V2 really misses Ephemera and just didn't know how to replace the slot very well. And I think he just put Vagabond Frog in there because it also has Ambush, it also costs 4, and that's really it.
And really, when you think about it, right, because we've seen White General be in that spot as well.
Yeah.
It's just about how you gain that extra damage, right? If Vagabond Frog stays on board, and especially if you evolve it, and it kind of just gets a swing, gets another swing, you're really kind of making back that +2 damage that White General would have provided you, right? I mean, obviously a little different of a scenario, but...
See, I'm opposite of Mofu. I think Vagabond Frog's got sweet art. I think it's a terrible card. I even thought it was terrible when it cost 3. The reason being is, especially when you're playing cards like Kunoichi Master, where you want to Evo it and then Evo it again the following turn, it kind of takes you away from that game plan by doing it with the Vagabond Frog first. And I don't think it's the most explosive thing that you can be doing right now. But like I said, as a replacement for Ephemera being an ambush follower on 4, it's not the worst choice, but it's definitely no Ephemera.
I actually agree a lot with what you had to say there. Perhaps part of it is also, due to losing Ephemera, Sword kind of as a class lost its favorite 4-drop. So in replacement, people have tried all kinds of things we saw White General, a lot of people tried Geno, there are some people even trying Floral Fencer again. But no one's really got a clear answer, so we really just have to see how it works out for Vetsu this game.
Absolutely, and this is one of those tough matchups for, I believe, Aggro Sword, because of how much removal and life gain that a Control Blood deck can put to the table. So it's really just, can V2 go under, before turns 5-6, or will he have to try to play a late game and maybe win with an Albert?
It's probably the hardest thing about this matchup for Sword, is simply how Sword really has a limited amount of damage that it can deal in a single turn. In that, it's a class that has so many different cards that allow you to hit your opponent's face as they come out. It probably has more access to Storm than any other class in the game. But it can't play it all at once, and so when you have a situation like Blood, where almost every card heals them a little tick at a time, if all that gets shrugged off, then you can very easily see Sword just get grinded out within even just a few turns.
Right. And with the lack of Council of Card Knights, it doesn't have that big mid-game push for card advantage that it once had. So realistically now it's just, I play threats, can you deal with them? Which is kind of what Council of Card Knights did, but it put 3 bodies on the table for 1 card. It gave you so much advantage that it kind of acted as if it were card draw, except it put the cards right onto the table. So very, very much so needed a nerf, and we see it now. And now we actually get to see what Aggro Sword would look like without a crazy option at 5.
Already just looking at the whole situation here, I feel like Vetu's already got a really tough puzzle to solve here. Even though he can get quite a bit of damage off of his followers in the early game, I'm seeing his curve really ends around the round table, which is going to put out the next 2 Juliets in his deck. But even then, that's not really going to scratch Underwear just the amount that he would need to finish him with something like Albert off the top.
Right. Absolutely correct. And I really like the value game plan, honestly, that Control Blood's gone. Like, we've seen it morph from week to week to week, but now we just see it with basically one game plan. It likes to draw cards, it likes to gain life, and it likes to kill followers. And that's all it does. It's not doing these crazy things that we've seen with, like, OTK combos and, Demon Commander Laura combos that we used to see in the past. It's just very straightforward. It does one thing and it does it well.
I think it's funny you say that, because this list actually has 2 copies of Maelstrom Serpent in the middle of it, which I wanted to point out earlier, but I think that's a really interesting part of it, is Control Blood really struggles to figure out what it wants to win the game with. Sometimes just grinding it out is enough, but usually I see Spawn of the Abyss. Now, as a person who hasn't really had the budget to play Control Blood much, I don't really particularly know the differences between how much pressure you can put on the Spawn of the Abyss and a Maelstrom Serpent in this sort of triple Blood Moon kind of list. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'll say it this way. Out of all of the Control Blood lists that we've seen run Maelstrom Serpent, not a single time has it been relevant. So I'm not going to say one way or the other about the card, because the card can be good depending on the metagame. But realistically, we're back to a Dragon Ramp metagame. We're back to a Control Blood metagame, at least on the NA side, where Maelstrom Serpent really doesn't have time to shine. Revelations clear it, Bahamut's clear it, You know what I mean? There are so many easy answers to it in the metagame that it really doesn't matter. And against aggro matchups, you really don't have time to be playing something like that. You know what I mean? You need to be killing, you need to be gaining life, not just putting a bunch of bodies on the table.
Right. I think it's really interesting then to kind of see what Underwear is trying to do with it in this deck. I'm not really completely certain what type of matchup he really wants to see it shine in, but I think it's probably not going to make the biggest difference this game, where he's already getting to the point where he's grinded out the remainder of Vetu's damage.
Realistically, too, Control Blood, as we've talked about with Jay-Z's lists, you're allowed a lot of freedom with your deck, so you can really play around with the top end however you want. Because it's not about just having a win condition that wins immediately with Control Blood. It's about stabilizing the board, getting your opponent basically drained of resources, and then just kind of winning with whatever's left over. It doesn't really matter at that point, because you're back at full life, you have card advantage, you have board control. It doesn't really matter what you have left over to win the game.
And even should you ever run out of resources on the way there, there's always Belphegor alongside Blood Moon and Mask, so you don't really have to pay too much life in order to just stay ahead in cards the entire time.
Right, so let's look at this game, for instance. Now, V2's out of cards, he's about to lose board control. Underwear's still at a safe life total of 14. And realistically, all he has left is, you know, a Sabrewer. And another Sabrewer, right? And a Baphomet. And that's all he needs to win. He doesn't need some crazy endgame, he just needs stuff.
Right. Especially highlighted here is just how much work Sabrewer puts in against Sword. It takes away the damage of an entire Juliet. But that's really, that card alone alongside the round table is a lot of the damage that Sword gets to put on at a time. Clears something, nothing in Sword clears it and survives. I think just seeing those cards alone made that match really quick.
Right. Yeah, multiple Sabrewers in any aggro matchup is exactly what you want to be seeing. He also had Diabolic Drain with a Blood Moon early. You know, Vampiric Kiss. He was just able to stabilize very easily and then just commit to the board with the Sabrewers and just kind of take over. That was pretty much just form and factor what Control Blood does against an aggro Sword deck.
Perhaps along that line of reasoning is why I think Underwear might just be positioned to have this entire game, or this match versus V2 figured out. I think we've talked a lot about how Neutral Forest works alongside how well Control Blood can stifle aggro. While Neutral Forest can sometimes be an inconsistent deck, I think there's one thing that it's really good at doing, and that is managing aggro.
Yes. All of its evolution targets are really good against aggro. Underwear is even opting to play Crystalia Aaron, which we haven't seen in all of the Neutral Forest lists. I mean, he's playing Grimnir, as we see. He's got a lot of defensive tools. We saw him mull 2 Hectors, so of course he's playing Hectors as well. So like you said, a lot of ways to deal with aggro.
Has a lot of options here for how he develops the next few parts of his turns this game. He has Kai'Sa, which I've noticed its inclusion seems to be really important in every deck that wants to run a neutral package, just because that infinite recursion of carrots both works alongside Staircase. I'm surprised he didn't try to put it down that turn. And always keeps neutrals in the hand, so cards like Hector never run out of fuel.
And yeah, I actually find that interesting as well. So my thought is he doesn't have a 5-drop, so he might be thinking about just dropping Staircase on 5 to fuel the Beauty and the Beast. But against aggro, I don't really know if that's the most effective plan. Stalling out on turn 5 just to play a Beauty and the Beast on turn 6. But of course, Underwear might think that's what he wants to do. Maybe even just to pull an Ariat win off because he thinks that, you know, V2 isn't even going to try to trade into the Beauty and the Beast, which Aggro Blood probably shouldn't.
Right. At the very least, pulling Unica in this situation gives him a little bit of credence in that he does have the turn 4 that V2 is going to have to deal with. But when he's on the play, and he's going to eat that first Evo tempo swing, I think it might be really difficult for him or unrealistic to try to land that Staircase on next turn.
Right. That's absolutely right. Now, if he can survive, and which he's been able to do, V2 did not get lucky like we saw our last Aggro Blood player get lucky with the perfect curve. Redrew into not an amazing curve, kind of slow, has 2 Care Bosses in hand, which will be good later. But again, not able to push as much damage as you would like in the early game from Aggro Blood. Wow.
That's 3 Care Bosses.
That's right.
At the very least, I think that lines out a bit of a game plan for V2 here. He's not necessarily dead to this Beauty and the Beast. He gets a ton of damage from Karabos. Should he just conserve 1 Evo point to be able to smash 8 into it. Might just be enough if he has 2 on board before that happens. And then perhaps the combination of 3 Karavoses could really turn the match in his favor.
Yeah, if the Beauty and the Beast gets dealt with, and it's really just, we saw neutral forest a lot, and we see it actually a lot of games, period. Once Beauty and the Beast gets dealt with, all of the rest of their stuff is 2/2s, right? It's just a bunch of 2/2s. And if it's trying to outvalue you with just Staircase and 2/2s while you're playing Caraboss and you're actually dealing damage every single turn alongside of drawing cards, I think you gain a slight edge.
We're seeing especially a bit of a flood of 2/2s here, where I think the ideal situation for Underwear would have been finding a Hector or something along those lines, but he's gonna have to just deal with this this Vite by just giving up his first Evo point for it.
I find it interesting he chose to do it with Carrot instead of Lyriel. I think he massively wants to get this Beauty and the Beast out next turn. I think that's been his plan all along. But it doesn't stave off as much damage.
Had he played the Staircase a bit earlier, I think it would only have made a difference of 1 follower death, that being the Grimnir. This may just be a really rough situation for Underwear to be playing in. Already shoved completely off the board. Has a Beauty and the Beast, but maybe not the time to actually resolve it here.
And realistically, these Vites, as we've been talking about all day, just coming in really handy. Like, Beauty and the Beast is able to clear the Vite, but it'll produce another follower, so you're not really reducing as much damage as you'd like. He might just opt... Oh. Okay.
Now that's really interesting. He does get to protect a bit more of his life total here. The Kindly Treant beats up, perhaps, an Evo that would force V2 to trade into it, using Karavos's body rather than just Evo face. But I think that this is still a pretty slow line. It doesn't really recover board enough for this to make a big difference to V2's game plan.
Right, and it really makes me question what Underwear's been doing with the early game, because it looks as if he was trying to build for Beauty and the Beast the entire time. Obviously had to switch because of the Vite play, it really just didn't do anything, but I really think that should have been the thought the whole time, that Beauty and the Beast isn't necessarily the best option for turn 6, and he would have been able to clear off a lot more damage had he just played a little bit more appropriately, I believe, in the early game.
I suppose that's a trap that Forest players, especially neutral Forest players, can get pulled into, is thinking that the single strongest player going to have the entire game is just going to be slamming Beauty and the Beast on 6, to the point that it can kind of dissuade you from doing things earlier in the game that might sacrifice some neutrals from your hand in order to respond to all the pressure your opponent's putting down.
Right, and it's also interesting because Underwear just won with Control Blood, literally the same exact strategy that you can employ with neutral Forest against an aggro deck. Play slow, run them out of cards, and then just win. I mean, obviously a little bit harder to do against Caraboss, but you can transition with Beauty and the Beast, whereas Blood doesn't really have that, as opposed to it being your main and only game plan in the early game.
And Caraboss as a card in general, I've been really interested to see just how often it has, or how often she has appeared in like pretty much every Bloodlist we've seen between all regions. It seems like this sort of mid-game transition from being able to play aggro to being able to grind down an opponent with a mid-range-esque strategy is just really picking up everywhere in Shadowverse lately.
This is one of the first times I've ever actually got to see Caraboss go face, and it does it well. 8 damage. We'll tie up the score now, both 1 and 1, and let's see how Underwear can pilot against Aggro Sword with his neutral Forest deck.
Do you think that this matchup is any better, or any more in Underwear's favor than against Blood? Considering that these are 2 really common aggro lists to begin with.
I know I've been bashing decks today, and this, again, guys, this has nothing to do with the players themselves. I think that Forest, as we've kind of stated, is just really shaky. It's good against Control Blood, it's good against D-Shift. Outside of that, I really don't know where it shines. I don't think it has a great place, even against aggro. I mean, Kindly Treant's great. Don't get me wrong, playing Lyriels and Unicas is great. But, realistically, Beauty and the Beast is really your only oomph, and it can be dealt with, right? And sometimes it's too slow, sometimes it's too clunky, like we just saw. And he just wasn't able to do anything that game.
Right.
Now he's got some Hectors, though, to fall back on. So maybe this game will be a little bit different. Hector's one of those cards we talked about earlier that can swing the match.
I think drawing 2 is extremely important versus Sword. Shouldn't be too hard to make sure that they're active by the time he gets to them. The Staircase probably won't pop first, but at the very least this Treant is now active. the Dance of Death in hand.
Mhm.
I think another extremely important card that we didn't see last game that is perhaps one of the strongest tools that Forest has ever received is Elf Twins Assault. I think very
Sure.
often that spell is what actually glues this deck together more than anything.
That is true. Elf Twins Assault, for those of you who don't know, 2 play point spell. When you play it, it will deal damage equal to the amount of neutral cards twice to random enemy followers. So it's a very good way of clearing not only small followers, but even big followers in the mid game.
I think perhaps it won't be necessary for Underwear to find tools like that. If he can just stave off V2's aggression for now, because V2 doesn't really have a good play here. All he has is the Quick Blader, and he doesn't want to mass trade into this. I think there we see a really hard hit to Vagabond Frog, actually. That would have been the perfect turn to just set him down.
Right. And I think both players here are missing on curve. So Underwear missed turn 2. He's going to miss turn 4 here. V2 missing turn 3. So both players staggered a little bit.
Now this I find to be really interesting, in that, as I mentioned before, Sword has a really tough puzzle to solve with what do I play on 4, but usually anything that can just evolve and trade over something and survive is good enough, because they don't really have any particularly strong tools to use, other than Floral Fencer, which isn't that good on the play. But here Vagabond Frog just barely does the job. Can't be removed after getting a lot of value.
That's another thing, I guess, to talk about. It's the same stat line as when it was a 3 cost. Now it's a 4 cost, so a lot harder to trade up. Fortunately, Underwear didn't have a 4 drop, so able to trade over the opposing 3 drop. I feel like getting very favorable position with that Vagabond Frog.
Here's the follow-up. Kunoichi Master that he does trade in, actually.
I like it, just consistent damage, and now really doesn't have anything to be dealt with, turning off that Hector. Elf Twins Assault, though, is finally picked up for Underwear here.
Funnily enough, there are tools in Forest that can deal with Ambush just fine, just because a lot of Ambush followers tend to have really low stat lines. Things like Will of the Forest just clean it all up. But Elf Twins Assault actually just hands the board back to Underwear here, just because of the nature of being a low-cost spell.
Yes. And he does have a Hector and a Crystalia Aaron to fall back on. So now it's up to V2 to see if he can navigate getting this damage done. Does he save the Evo point? Does he save the Albert? Now he's got 2 Alberts. And one really gross play that I think it's gross, right? Centaur Vanguard plus Albert on turn 7, I think is just gross. That's like 7 damage. You know, it's really easy to pull off. There's no, like, you know, weird things you have to do with it. Even Quick Bladers, right? Quick Bladers alongside Albert. You're just like, why? Why do they have that extra little bit of damage? I don't like it.
You'd like to imagine that Albert is just kind of the damage that gets done during a turn, because he's probably just... I could probably just call him the best Storm follower in the entire game. I think he is designed to be, at the very least.
Maybe at sometimes he parries with Roach, but more often than not, Albert wins that fight.
At least the best independent one.
Right.
So really interesting about you mentioning that, as I think Centaur Vanguard is a card that a lot of people just dropped for many expansions until this one. Now, why do you think that is? Is it just a matter of Perseus? Is it a matter of Perseus and Juliet?
100% it's a matter of just more commanders, period. So Perseus being the optimal one, right? Because now you can actually have a Storm Follower on turn 2, which is absolutely amazing. And of course, with Juliet being added to the 3-drop slot alongside Novice Trooper, you just have more early game commanders. And a lot of these decks, as you've seen, are running even things like Palace Fencer and Princess Vanguard and just other commanders that are cheap. So realistically, it's going to have Storm more often than not.
As you
Plus,
said,
you can even play it alongside Roundtable Assembly, right? Pull double Juliets and kind of have like that same type of turn 7 Albert turn.
Now that you mentioned, I think that's actually the most damage that can be dealt in a turn, rather than Albert. Juliet now 1-ups that off of Roundtable, and that she does 6 base if you evolve it, and then Centaur Vanguard.
Yeah.
It's a lot of damage that's possible, but I think that V2's in a pretty tough position here just due to that Hector.
I will say that I think Cygames did a very awesome job in nerfing a very specific card for aggro and Ephemera, because I feel like that was the one that was leading to these games that we just didn't like watching, right? The games where they just be over on turn 5, because it's just, okay, Ephemera into Roundtable Assembly is just too much damage.
Often, I remember, Ephemera didn't really even win games on her own when it had to be a part of decks like what people tried to make happen with Aggro Shadow, where Ephemera was really only able to add damage to single cards or conditional storms like Phantom Howl, or otherwise would have to supplement the damage of boards like Prince Catacomb or Fairies from Forest. But in Sword's case, Ephemera just simply put an additional point of attack on every Storm follower that ever hits the board. And I think the difference in the damage it could have offered a deck like V2's and the damage that was offered to him by Vagabond Frog is so different that it could have been the difference of the game.
Yep, and I think we're now getting to a place where Underwear just has plenty of wards. He has another Elf Twins Assault in case ambush followers come out. He has Dance of Death for this Albert. We're getting to the place where V2 doesn't really have many cards he can draw to bust through all of this. And I find it very fortunate for Underwear. Missing turn 2, missing turn 4, getting that Elf Twins Assault on the turn that he needed it, just really worked out for him. And now we're in the end game, and this is where you want to be with a deck like Neutral Forest. You got Staircase popping, you have a Beauty and the Beast, you have everything you need.
Whenever you turn a turn 9 Albert into a bad play, that is when you have just put Sword against the wall.
And V2 understanding what's going on, Underwear getting the point.
Underwear with Neutral Forest will take the win. There are some incredibly strong options that are available to you in Neutral Forest. It's just about the timing of when you get that. And I feel like that's where most of the pressure comes from. Do I have what I need at the right time? V2 certainly did, despite the fact that he did end up passing a few turns early on. Incredibly strong. He didn't even really need the Beauty and the Beast in this particular game.
Well, not V2, but Underwear.
Or sorry, yes, Underwear. Yeah. You're correct. Correct. Right. I think my non-existent brain just became even more non-existent. So there's that. Let's take a look at the groups to see kind of where we are here. V2 with the loss goes down 0-1, and Underwear, the first in the group to make it up to the top. 1-0, a good start for Disastro's member there. One of the players who was originally in Season 2, back now, trying to make his second run at the regional finals. And he's going to do so fairly successfully here today. And we are going to get prepped for the next match in the group, which is going to be a very interesting one, right? Because we're now talking about the one and only Jay-Z. That's who we're talking about. Jay-Z there against Hackdarox, and Jay-Z kind of opted to play very slow lineups in recent kind of times. You know, I think during Season 1, he was playing very aggressive lineups. Over the course of Season 2 and Season 3, he began to decide that slower decks were what was going to provide him that consistency, and did very well with it. So now, today, he's running with Dragon Shadow against Hackdarox's Blood Forest. So we see Forest appearing yet again. Runecraft is banned for Jay-Z, and Dragoncraft is banned for Hackdarox. But I feel like, you know, you have to kind of, any kind of betting man or woman is going to say Jay-Z probably has the edge here. But Hackdarox, I think, didn't really have a great opportunity to show off what he had to offer in Season 2 as much. And I still think there's a lot of potential that is behind this player. How do you think his lineups are going to match up against Jay-Z?
I think he's got a great lineup against Jay-Z. Jay-Z opting not to play Control Blood this week, kind of like the deck that's been positioning him so well so far this season, even in the Contenders Cup, and opting for a more traditional lineup. I mean, he's playing Mid Shadow and Ramp Dragon. You know what I mean? This is time tested. It's nothing, you know, extra crazy, but they're solid decks. But I think Hackdarox has really good decks here. Like Neutral Rune in this lineup, I think is pretty good. And he's, you know, he also has his Ramp Dragons. Or no, I'm sorry, he has his Control Blood. Ramp Dragon got banned out this time, so Control Blood, perfect.
Yeah,
perfect for this
I actually, you brought up a deck, and I think it's Jay-Z that's running it. It's Neutral Rune. Now, it did end up getting banned. I think Hackdarox was talking about how he didn't really know what to make of it, and so he banned it. But I do think it's a very interesting choice. Let's talk about it a little bit. We haven't seen Neutral Rune in a very, very long time, but it was incredibly powerful when it was first introduced. Maybe one of the more powerful decks, I think, unrealized by the time it got changed. I mean, not realized as much as Neutral Blood was taking up the space, but still incredibly good, and the key card for it was Felice. Felice was a very strong card, was tuned back a little bit, and it's interesting to see Jay-Z decide to bring it out again in tournament play. Let's talk a little bit about Felice and kind of go through why we think it would be a relevant list to bring in this particular meta. But Mofu, can you talk to me a little bit about this card?
Now, I find Felice to be one of the most interesting cards that was ever added to RuneCraft, because very few cards like this actually exist in RuneCraft. It's not dependent or synergistic with anything in RuneCraft's class mechanics. It's not anything to do with Spell Boost or Earthright. It just has that little neutral effect that gives it tempo, and it's a mid-game Storm follower. I think the only one other than Blade Mage that has Storm, or except in weird cases like Irifa. So for Rune to have just sudden access to this tempo swinging Storm, I think was a really huge change in direction for the class and what it could do. The nerfs did kind of reel back the amount of difference it made, but really interesting card to add to a deck like this.
And this deck has things like Illusionist, and of course, because it's the neutral package, it's actually got the Sahaka wheel with the late game kind of set, the late game crew. A very interesting list. I kind of wish it wasn't banned because I would love to see how it performs, but where do you think this fits in kind of the current state of the game, Exo?
Pretend it's neutral forest, just a little bit better. It's got a more consistent game plan. Felice is a 5 cost instead of a 6 cost that we see Beauty and the Beast be. The deck is a lot more consistent, especially with dealing damage to your opponent. It doesn't have to just wait for specific instances of either running your opponents out of cards with a bunch of 2/2s or winning with a single card and beating the beast. It has just a consistent lineup of damage, Illusionist alongside things like Gilgamesh and basically anything early in the game. Felice does crazy things. We've seen Hector do crazy things. Impartial Strix on curve is absolutely a monster. And Witch of Sweets gives it extra card draw in the early game, so much so that you don't even see Staircase to Paradise in this list.
And I think that's an interesting analogy you make. Think of it as neutral forest, but a little more consistent, a little more better in your thought. But unfortunately, we won't get to see it run. But that does open up Jay-Z to play the other two decks. And you know, sometimes when you have a deck that your opponent feels like they absolutely must ban, it gives you a better method of targeting your decks to be kind of more pointed, right? Because then your opponent concedes, basically says, all right, well, I'm just going to let perhaps a bad matchup through because I absolutely do not want to deal with something like PDK or something like Neutral Rune. I think might be the scenario here. So let's see, can Hackrox defeat Jay-Z? It's going to be a tough one. Jay-Z, I don't feel like he's actually lost the match in an incredibly long time.
It's been a while.
I feel like he won the Season 2 finals on winner's side, I'm pretty sure. He won the Contenders Cup on winner's. What the? Is that? What?
I love it.
It was just Halloween, you know, a little while ago. You know, maybe Hackrox forgot to throw out his costume. He's ready to go today.
He looks completely serious, like poker-faced kind of determination here. I love that more than anything.
Absolutely. But yeah, it's been a long time since we've seen Jay-Z lose. So today might be the day. Maybe Hackrox has it. I think his decks are very well positioned against Jay-Z, but of course we've seen Jay-Z just kind of push through everything.
All right. Now this. Oh, sorry, I was going to say is that this is a matchup that I've actually seen teams between you and I had to cast a lot before. This is actually a matchup I remember a lot from Rage tournaments of Mid Shadow versus Control Blood. Extremely grindy matchup that just really comes down to threat after threat after answer after answer. But I think there are a couple new tools here, things like Andrew Alphys that kind of mix it up. Now, how do you feel about the position of Shadow in this particular matchup, since Control Blood can be fairly easy to understand?
Right. So Control Blood is really just trying to outlast Shadow, and realistically, it just comes down to, can Jay-Z fill up a strong enough board backed up by an Ektar to get enough damage through to then finish off with whatever he has left over. I think that Mid Shadow is a lot more poorly positioned against Control Blood than it ever has been, because it can't set that up as well as it used to, and it doesn't have a lot of early game damage anymore. But it does have a lot more card advantage now, especially when you play Andrealphys. So it could just be about maybe Mid Shadow turning into the control deck that's trying to outlast Control Blood. And it's just whoever can do it better with managing their resources.
I think another really big part of it is that we see this more in players in our region than players in Japan, but whereas players in Japan usually just relied on the neutral package for win conditions and were fine with just if I ever get to resolve a Bahamut, I probably win off of it otherwise.
Right.
We see a lot more of a focus on in-class win conditions from regions like EU and NA, where even a deck like this, I think if I looked at it correctly, has 2 Spawns of the Abyss, wants to even finish off with Azazel, sometimes in conjunction with that. I think that changes the dynamic of the matchup a bit to where Hactorox isn't only looking to grind, but if he can just resolve his win conditions versus Jay-Z, that's really difficult for Shadow to deal with.
Jay-Z did, however, account for this, you know, being him, is playing 3 Necro Assassins on top of his already, you know, consistent ways to deal with things like Spawn of the Abyss. So he does have answers to the end game that Hactorox did put together. I don't know how much of a part that will actually play over time, but Jay-Z, especially knowing how to play Control Blood, probably knows exactly what he needs to do to beat it. So very specifically, I think he knows how to pilot against this matchup. I just don't know if Shadow has all the tools it needs, that's all.
Right. And here, as you said, the use of the Necro Assassin allows Jay-Z to maneuver right around cards like Sabura and deny them value. But value alone is not what wins this matchup.
Right. It's about smart play, positioning every single turn correctly. I'd actually like to hark back to the game yesterday that we saw Akamaru Red play with his Shadow deck and how he maneuvered against Dirt Rune. A lot of times it's not about just expending what you have, going all in, or, you know, doing anything crazy. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly what your opponents can do and playing around them, and then eking out small bits of advantage turn after turn that eventually just net you a win.
We may see a similar situation to that, actually. I think yesterday we saw a game where playing Dirt Rune versus Shadow, he actually had to manage his life versus a Tyrant. And similarly, Jay-Z's not playing a type of Shadow that gets Shadows quickly, but he does have a single copy of Tyrant to try to get that reach. We may find a similar situation where that's one of the biggest threats you can hold versus Blood, especially since, unlike Rune, Blood likes to be around the range where Tyrant would end up being a lethal hit.
Right, and realistically, that might be Jay-Z's game plan. It might just be, you know what, it doesn't really matter. I just need to make sure that my opponent is at 15 or less and have an EVA point, or 13 or less. However, if Hactorox, you know, decides that is what Jay-Z's win condition, he can always plop down a Mask of Black Death at the appropriate time, or gain enough health before it actually matters. So it's really just an ebb and flow type of game.
Now I'm seeing a lot of these players, we saw this yesterday too, they're really only running 2 Masks of the Black Death. I used to see, or I'm used to seeing Control Blood usually opt for 3 because they just want protection from that kind of thing. But I think that's what leads us to a matchup like this, where the most important card to watch is probably going to be the Mask of the Black Death in Hactorox's hand, and the next one, if he can find it throughout this game.
Right. I actually talked about that yesterday too, and we've been talking about Mask of Black Death pretty much every single week since Control Blood came back into the meta. Mask of Black Death is basically one of the best options for Control Blood, period. And I still find it funny that some players are opting to play less than 3 in their deck, just because of how versatile it is and how many different things it can answer.
There's really not many cards like this, actually, that can negate so much damage at once. I think Blood is in a really unique position in creating a control archetype, just because it has a card like this. The next closest equivalent I can even conjure off the top of my head is like Haven has some things like Aegina and Nowis, which can limit damage over short periods of time, but they're much easier to navigate around than Mask is.
Right, well, Mask can essentially sit around for, you know, 4 or 5 turns, depending, and just kind of just be there. Whereas, you know, Nowis, Nois, Nisha, however you want to say her name, is a 1-turn effect, right? So a lot easier, like you said, to play her.
Now that you mentioned that, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. It's like Nisha or something.
I think it's Nisha. We here on the show like to call her Nois. At least Envy brought that to light. So really just depends on your flavor.
Right. I thought it was a male too, due to the grand blue art. Very handsome young man, I thought. But I could be wrong.
But we actually see one interesting thing to note. Jay-Z's already used 2 of his Necro Assassins. So maybe the Spawn of the Abyss can actually get a lot of work done. However, Jay-Z does have a Lurching Corpse combo in his hand, so that's still available.
I think Shadow gets a lot of leeway in this matchup due to that. It's really interesting that I think when trying to navigate this matchup, I think someone who's not really familiar with it might have a really tough decision-making scheme of when can I use things like Lurching Corpse and Necro Assassin? At what point am I forced to have one in hand, or how long throughout the game do I still need to hold on to them? And I think we've seen these Necro Assassins used at pretty good times that just gives Jay-Z enough board pressure to where he's not having to bend over backwards to deal with every follower that Hactorox plays with extreme value like Righteous Devil or Sabura.
I also find it interesting that Jay-Z decided to let this Righteous Devil just kind of go through. He could have evolved one of the zombies and used a zombie party to kill it, but I think he favors keeping the card advantage that zombie party can do for next turn, essentially, with this Righteous Devil possibly trading, and then zombie party finishing it off and filling the board up again. So I really like that Jay-Z's taking this super tempered approach. He's kept his Lurching Corpse option even after using the Necro Assassins. And yeah, I honestly don't know how this match is going to eke out. It could literally just be by cards in deck. We've seen that happen several times with Jay-Z playing. So, and that's not to say it's a bad thing. That just means that both players know exactly what they need to do in the matchup, and neither person can gain an edge, and the person who drew a couple extra cards ends up losing the game.
We've seen players mostly go for value and looking for more cards from the deck, even now, committing Belphegor more than anything, and just not using these evolution points, trying to get as far ahead on the board as possible. I think this turn is actually the first time this game where Hactorox has had such an advantageous board state, and it's only still just by a little.
Yep, and I really like the Azazel now. The Azazel will threaten lethal pretty much every single turn now, so Jay-Z has to be careful. He knows it's a possibility, being open deckless, and then, you know, especially after the spawn can come down and kill with Azazel, the board right now can kill with Azazel, so Jay-Z's going to have to navigate here. This is now on Hactorox to win.
I'm actually sweating a little bit because both players are in such a tight situation. He recognizes Jay-Z has one copy of Tyrant that could come out at any point, similar to Azazel. Any amount of damage he lets through that's too much past a turn where he could play Mask of the Black Death is going to just threaten ending the game. But at the same time, as long as he has a board state like this, it's not really in Jay-Z's favor to try to last any longer than Spawn of the Abyss resolving, because he can't rely on a Lurching Corpse alone to hit it through all of this.
Right, absolutely. So Hactorox, I feel like playing perfectly, like just filling the board up, being consistent with what he's doing. He's trading and building the board up, and now that he has the option to just straight up win the game with Azazel, I feel like, yeah, that's exactly what you want to be doing.
That zombie party, just now, raises Jay-Z to 18 shadows, and if Hactorox clears it, that's going to be it for Tyrant. Just a little bit more face damage, and he has that with an evolution point. That leads me to the question of, do you think Hactorox is pressured to use Mask of the Black Death now, this following turn, or perhaps just a few turns after that?
Well, this attack would be very telling to me. So my opponent forcefully evoed and went face for 3 damage when he hasn't done anything of the sort lately. So this would say to me, okay, definitely Tyrant is now active. It's the card that I have to worry about, must deal with. If Hactorox doesn't appropriately define what just happened, then he will just straight up lose to it. So I'm hoping he picks up on the signal here.
There's a lot that actually goes into navigating these few turns, because Azazel, assuming it's not being played on the exact same turn where Hactorox just simply has lethal, it can't really be used to set up some kind of a use of spawn later, sort of means that he needs to make sure he ends the game as soon as he resolves the Abyss, and he just now commits to it.
Yep, and unfortunately he did it in an unfavorable board spot, so Jay-Z can actually just play around this mask while also dealing with the spawn. So I think now, with the extension of Spawn, and I don't think it was a bad play from Hactorox, I probably would have opted for the Belphegor and just more sustain until I built the board back up, but it's really hard to do against Shadow, right? So it's really hard to navigate that entire game plan. But now Jay-Z can kind of comfortably clear the board, get in some chip damage, try to get that mask down, and kind of just be comfortable to win, because now Bahamut's turned off, Azazel's turned off, and there's not really much else Hactorox can do from this point.
Right. Perhaps he's just making the call that he's played out most of the followers that he's going to be using, or at least most of the low cost. Can I call 4 to 5 cost followers low cost? Anything that he can play alongside other cards in his deck. He's mostly started to drain out of his resources, already 24 cards in. Perhaps he's thinking, if I go for this Belphegor and try to clear, then I'm not really guaranteed to draw enough to make my board position any better than it would be if I just went for the Abyss now and just tried to commit to winning.
Right, and I don't mind this line. This is basically saying I've already seen 2 Necro Assassins. I'm not really worried about the Lurching Corpse thing.
Give it to me.
So this is, as you mentioned before, just a perfect response to that.
Yep, and I think we'll actually see the Evo here. Oh no, not pre-combat. So electing to let all of the damage slide here. If he would have Evo'd before the mask was popped, he could have actually dealt 4 damage this turn. Decided not to, though.
I think it's a difference of he wants to save the Evo so he can have maximum damage come out of hand with the Tyrant. The difference just being that this, well, whereas the other play that you mentioned might be better in the case that Hactorox had another mask or something, in this case, all he's risking is healing, which Hactorox didn't actually
the other setup would have actually provided a lethal setup this turn. So right now Hactorox could be at 11 and Jay-Z could have just plopped down a Deathly Tyrant to win. However, without being 20 shadows, it doesn't really matter that much for this turn, and I guess it might not really matter in the long run. It just gives Hactorox more time to heal.
I think he just slams it down and wins.
Oh,
I
never
forgot
mind.
for a second
Never
that Tyrant cost it 6.
That's right. That's right. You can actually just build that last shadow there.
Like you would imagine that 15 damage
there.
faces the whole turn, but like I constantly miscalculate this when playing against this deck, as I just forget that they can get the shadows that turn anyway.
So Jay-Z, regardless of the Evo last turn or not, was able to get to 20 shadows and pump out the last bit of damage he was going to need anyway. So regardless, Evo, no Evo, same exact play, perfectly executed by Jay-Z. Just the simple fact that he had the answer, you know what I mean, to the spawn when he needed it. He dealt with the board states every single turn going into it. Really just played that very well. Hactorox, nice. I can't say really played it wrong either. I mean, that both players just on point that game. Jay-Z just slightly edging him out before the end of the game there.
Yeah, with 2 lists that have such explosive win conditions against each other, it can be really difficult to figure out just at what point you can commit what resources, how much you have to heal. I think one of the most impressive things was Jay-Z knowing when he could use Necro Assassins to just keep on the board and pressure Hactorox enough to where he could get him hovering around that range where a Tyrant would be lethal.
Right. And Tyrant doing a very, very funny impression of Roach against Control Blood. It's just one of those big Storm followers that can just OTK you out of nowhere, and I think that's why Jay-Z brought it. You know, it's one of those things that if you are playing a grindy matchup, you can still win a game.
And coming off the back of that, we are now witnessing what is widely referred to as the pillow matchup. I think I have seen this many times in my days, and it has never sped up. This is the equivalent of like really just Paicho in Shadowverse. It is a game of nothing but patience and holding resources.
Yes.
At the moment, really, I think the early game always just comes down to development. We're just going to really be seeing them drawing cards and biting against each other's early game followers and resources that are usually used to bite out aggro with very little impact for a while.
This is kind of like the last matchup. The main differences here are that I think Blood has a slight edge because of Emeraldas being able to just clear out Bahamut's easily. However, Hactorox is not playing the form factor Control Blood list with Bahamut's himself, right? He's not playing like the super late game, like you said, neutral package that we would see from Japan type of list. He's got his own end game, and I think that makes him a little weaker versus Dragon. So I think these decks are very evenly matched yet again. I think maybe Dragon has a slight edge now because of the lack of endgame from Hactorox, but Hactorox has a combo endgame, so if he is able to pull that off, he might be able to just sneak a win out.
Now, there's something interesting that I know that you have a really, really wide history with card games. With that being said, in Shadowverse, I haven't really thought about things in these terms much before, but there's like articles and such that refer to mirror matches as still relegating archetypes to each player, like that being the beatdown versus the control.
Sure. I
haven't really thought too much often about how in Shadowverse this can happen in matchups like this that otherwise just seem decided by cards like Bahamut and the like. When Hactorox put down the Sabura on turn 5, just to get something on the board, do you think that that's kind of like Hactorox is assigning to himself the role of the beatdown where he wants to have board pressure over Jay-Z?
Well, I think it manifests itself differently in this game. So being the beatdown in this game doesn't really mean as much as it would in other card games. Basically, in this game, it's just reactive or proactive, which is similar, but not quite the same. Beatdown meaning, you know, I am going to be the aggressive player. I am going to be the one that sets the tone of the game. Whereas just proactive versus reactive means, you know, in this game specifically, you have to use your evolution orbs, right? Or you're trying to force your opponent to use a resource as opposed to just being the person who's going to win faster or the person who is, you know, presenting lethal faster or anything like that. It's just about resource manipulation a lot more in this game. So it's just interesting. Making a play like Sabrewer, that does give you, you know, a little insight to what Hackrox is thinking. He doesn't think he needs to save that for late game Bahamut's or anything like that. So maybe he is trying to pressure those Evo points. Maybe he is trying to just pressure more resources out of the hand before it gets to the late game. But as you can see, beatdown, that's not really happening, right?
I guess it's also very difficult with the amount of value you can stuff into a deck in Shadowverse to actually really resolve that much damage. When you have two classes like this, Blood and Dragon, perhaps just the two classes that have the most access to healing just under Haven.
Plus, in a game like Shadowverse, cards cost more in decks like this, right? You don't get to play a lot of spells or followers all at the same time. It's just, you know, Haymaker after Haymaker after Haymaker, as opposed to being able to do multiple things or, you know, responding to things or anything like that. It's just very straightforward. I've got a threat, you've got a threat. So you've got to make the best use out of your turns.
Yeah, we're seeing exactly that happen here. Had a Spawn of the Abyss, wanted to just try to throw that into a lethal setup there, but didn't work out because Jay-Z just easily responded with a Bahamut that Hackrox probably saw coming.
Yeah.
Now here
and
we
I don't
see,
mind that. I don't mind that at all. It's kind of like the whole polyphonic roar thing or the first Bahamut thing. If I've got it and you don't, I win the game. But, you know, in the case that Jay-Z does have it, yeah, you got to keep playing.
Here we see what I like to call the Take-Two special. I think this is where Mr. Full Moon, like, this is it. This is the situation where Mr. Full Moon is good. I mean, a lot of people probably said that he was one of the only answers that now exists to Aegis or other things like that. But for Take-Two players, the reason why you snap pick him half the time, or why experienced players do, is just because if your opponent Bahamut's, it's a 113. That's it.
Yeah, 113 really is actually still pretty decent value. It's not amazing, but it's decent value.
It clears tokens.
Yes, it does.
It could clear bats if you have any of those.
It's hard to deal with if you think about it. Like, that 113 might not be very menacing, but, like, you know, 10 turns later after it's attacked you 10 times, you're just like, how do I actually get rid of this thing?
I think that's what makes Mr. Full Moon actually a really unique card. There's not really many cards in Shadowverse that deal with things without really dealing with them. We have in Forestcraft a mechanic that prevents followers from attacking, and I think none of which have really seen tournament play or competitive play in a really long time. So Mr. Full Moon
I'm
really...
completely wrong. I missed this. Bahamut is in play for Hackrox. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So never mind.
It's other neutral cards like, I guess, Israfil or a Sahagwil package that I'm very used to seeing Japanese players using. But Bahamut just seems like a mainstay of control too much for it to be a difference at all.
Sure. So I kind of really like Hackrox's position here. It really is just going to come down to, can he hold off longer than Jay-Z can with his resources? I don't know if I like that Sabrewer play, though. I think that was simply for reacting to what we were talking about. How am I actually going to kill this thing? I need to do it. And he already feels like he can answer an opposing Bahamut, but he kind of gave away one. Like, if a Bahamut war started right now, right? And Jay-Z was left with the last one, that Sabrewer wouldn't be there to back up Hackrox to save him. So,
Hackrox is really limited. I think that's, outside of his own Bahamut, that's his only real way of dealing with a Bahamut. Even Temptress Vampire, if not in conjunction with something like Diabolic Drain, even just playing her and evolving her into it is still not 13.
Right. It's just interesting to see the Sabrewer come down like that, just to empty off something that Mr. Full Moon already technically dealt with. So Jay-Z kind of getting up in card advantage here, especially with cards like Star Phoenix, just trying to eke out advantage every turn that he can. I really like it again.
Yeah, I really love that use of Star Phoenix, actually. Even if you just glance at his hand, still has another Dragon Oracle, which cards like Dragon Oracle, or cards that are early game spells, tend to try to refund themselves to be useful to Dragon later with the card draw, but Star Phoenix adds a whole nother element to that. If you can think of it as summoning a 2/2 every single time you play a spell, I think that might make it one of the most useful or most pivotal cards that Jay-Z ends up playing in a matchup like this.
He's one of the first players that we've seen in competitive play actually bring the Star Phoenix to the Ramp Dragon package. I think it's very useful. I think you can eke out a lot of advantage with it. Even if you wanted to play something like Staircase beside it, you know what I mean? Just extra value there. You don't have to, of course. But just another value card, right? And Dragon is a value deck. So making sure that you have options across the board to deal with most things is what you want in a control deck. So
the Star Phoenix, alongside the remainder of Bahamut, can deal with a threat like Temptress Vampire here without committing more than just a single Dragon Oracle, and I think that I personally had not actually seen much out of this card, but I think even just entertaining possibilities like that shows off how useful it can be.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is actually an attempt from Jay-Z to force a Bahamut so that he can Bahamut the Bahamut in response, and he's got 2 Scythers to back it up anyway, so he's not worried about the Bahamut war at this point.
Mm-hmm. He raises himself back out of the, or climbs slowly back out of the life disadvantage Hactorox put on him with Temptress Vampire, but Hactorox is just resilient on not showing this Bahamut until he absolutely has to.
And that Bahamut's still in play, I might add. Still in play.
It's gotten reduced all the way down to a Bladed Hedgehog without an effect.
Right.
I think it's done a total of like 2 to 3 face damage. Like, I still don't have an opinion of Mr. Full Moon. I think this Bahamut has been dealt with, but it's still been useful enough to the point where there are some other removal options that may have dealt with it just fine.
To be quite honest, I think Mr. Full Moon is a great one-of in Control Blood, just in case somebody brings an Aegis against you, because you literally can't beat that card, or a Beauty and the Beast, you know what I mean? So there are uses for it, it's just not good in most matchups.
Mm-hmm. Actually holds off on the hit from the Bahamut there.
He's like, nah.
It's just too much energy after all the attacks he's already thrown out with it.
That's right. To be fair, we got to see a lot of extra laser beams this game, and I'm always a fan of Bahamut laser beams.
You know, Bahamut, when that card first got released, first of all, its impression was its summon animation, which is, like, it takes up the entire screen. It's like the only card that still does that. But the attack animation is probably like just the most mind-blowing in the game, aside from like Deepwood Anomaly.
I love it. I love it every time. So, in case you guys are wondering why he's not playing the Baphomets from hand just for extra value here, it's because of the card deck size. So if you look at Hactorox, he's 1 card above Jay-Z in turn order, and he's trying to keep it that way, so that in case the game does go long, he won't lose to that aspect. And that might actually be the same reason why we see Jay-Z hold the Oracle and or the Fervor to see if Hactorox will ever manipulate that.
Mm-hmm. This is the exact epitome of when Japanese chats for tournaments or streamers otherwise just start spamming Pokerverse, because neither player is in a position where they can reveal much of their hand, even though both players already have a lot of guesses on what the other player is holding.
Ooh, okay, decides to opt for the Bahamut here. Not bad, because he has the Righteous Devil to answer a follow-up Bahamut. However, Scythers in the hand from Jay-Z just gives him more options.
You mentioned before that Jay-Z was possibly holding a lot of card draw in order to stay ahead, and if we consider that this might be a game where neither of them actually reach 0 defense, then you can actually consider the remaining deck size as a health total. And he runs out a little bit by going for the Dragon Summoner here, or at least he gives Hactorox a chance to draw 1 card without giving up that advantage.
Right, and that's exactly what Hactorox leads with. Rightfully so. And I think Jay-Z has just understood that Hactorox is playing that game, so Jay-Z needs to speed up a little bit. I think his card draw is now, alright, I need to start using it so that I can start developing advantage to win this game, otherwise I'm just going to straight lose the long game.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and that's what we're seeing.
Be such a difficult time in the game to make such a decision, though. Control Blood has had the card advantage for a while. You're both down to your bottom halves of your deck, and even though he has 2 Bahamuts, Control Blood's not exactly a class against which Bahamut is a very guaranteed threat. 3.
Well, especially now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can afford to throw him around a little bit. You don't even need to at this point. Honestly, with 3 Emeraldas and a Righteous Devil with 2 Evolution Orbs left, this is if I'm Hactorox, I'm saying I've won this game already. All I need to do is wait the next 13 turns. And where you guys might think it's Pillowverse, in my mind, it's a win against one of the toughest opponents in the game, especially when you think it's a shirt.
And even to add to that, I think something that's very amazing about that type of victory is you have to identify that your game plan is going to be lasting out every last card in an extremely high value deck like Dragon.
Right.
So he both had to develop the idea that he noticed he has had this advantage and has managed to get this far in the game with it, and is now committed towards it. To us, spectators, you can Pillowverse though.
Right. With the second Emerald, I would have felt that way. With the third one, I would have literally taken a sigh of relief and just been like, okay, there's not really a way I can lose this game. I just need to calm down and just answer everything that Jay-Z does, and then we'll be just fine.
Mm-hmm.
And don't accidentally misclick that Azazel or something like that.
Right. More or less. It's funny that Azazel is the main, or a huge supplement to the win conditions of Hector, and is now the card that he absolutely must not play. I think if there's any exceptions to the read we've made on how this game's going to go, it could just be these Star Phoenixes, because as long as Jay-Z has spells, it guarantees he has a board, too.
That's right.
Sinners be purged.
And yeah, I like this play. This basically says, all right, now you have to answer my value. Doesn't even Evo it. That's an interesting choice.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting choice. If that was the play, I might have actually elected to do something like play... No. Actually, I don't know. That's just a really interesting play. That's saying, you know what, you can deal with this, and I'm just throwing this card away versus at least clearing some of the board off. I don't know. I don't know about
really
playing that card there.
To make. Yeah.
Yeah.
And not committing to using it to clear anything actually validates Jay-Z's board here. He gives him the chance to just simply answer it out of hand. And now these Star Phoenixes are something he has to deal with, but you can't really give up an Emeralda here, can you?
You can give up one, maybe. If I'm Hackrox, I've counted one Bahamut from Jay-Z. You need to make sure that you have an answer to every single Bahamut. So as long as you have 2 answers in hand, you're free to use the third one out of your hand.
Right.
That Righteous Devil play, though, it gave up a huge resource, especially when you've managed to hold on to both of your Evolution Orbs this long. I feel like giving up that resource has got to feel bad.
The only healing we see remaining in his hand, even, is just his Mask of Black Death.
That's right, so he's got to be careful here.
Oh, he commits it already, which is really interesting. His Mask is really the only follow-up to Azazel that can guarantee that he manages to get away with reducing himself that low. Now Azazel would pop half of it for him.
And I think the Sahakul and Israfil play is perfect for this turn. It will pop the mask completely with all of the attacks, save the Evolution Orb, and keep Hackrox out of Vengeance.
Mm-hmm. I think if he goes for that line of play, that could just force Hackrox to use another Emeralda, which could just massively swing things towards Jay-Z's advantage.
I think Jay-Z might think that there's another Righteous Devil in hand from Hackrox, especially after how willing he was to throw away the last one, and might not opt to immediately play Bahamut. But I think he's running out of time, right? You've just got to start. Like, after you see the second Emeralda with 2 Bahamuts in hand, I think I might just go for it. I've already seen 2 Righteous Devils as well, but we're getting down to the bottom end of the deck, right? Like, you have access to most of your cards at this point.
I think he's going to go with what you said. Just gets the value out of Sahakul here. This may be his last turn where he just plays reactively. It's very likely we actually see a Bahamut next turn, but it does kind of depend on what Hackrox draws here.
It could just be another Star Phoenix refill with a Fervor. That was a perfect draw. Now he doesn't have to commit anything.
Right, Revelation, and still, just holding on to this Belphegor means he still has the deck size advantage.
Yep.
Pure-Hearted Singer also would just completely offline carded his hand, however.
Fighting is so sorrowful.
I love this. Now it's just the big threats that are not Bahamuts. Draws the Zeus now, so now there's a lethal setup with pretty much any big follower that Jay-Z can stick. I don't like the Bahamut here.
Bahamut. That's really, really interesting, yeah. And Bahamut puts on a lot larger of a threat afterwards than Emeralda would. So you'd imagine he'd want to hold that until the turn where he might actually get to use Azazel with it. But using it as his first reaction to a threat. could be a little tough.
I find a couple of these plays to actually be interesting. I think Hacked Rocks, realistically, that's not a bad play because it does kind of force Jay-Z to have a Bahamut reaction unless he has another Scyther. But I think we know all 3 Scythers are gone. I haven't counted specifically that card. And then the follow-up Bahamut was forced, of course. But then drawing into the Blood Moon here actually gave Hacked Rocks an endgame now that Jay-Z has to start worrying about.
Right. But I imagine Hacked Rocks has been counting the Bahamuts as well and knows Jay-Z could respond with his last one down to only 7 cards left in his deck. I feel like the commitment of resources Hacked Rocks has been doing actually shows a little bit of fear from him here.
Yeah.
Even just playing the Righteous Devil earlier.
Yep. He's just afraid of the Star Phoenixes. Realistically, though, he's still in the same position. He still has an answer to a big threat. But now Jay-Z has access to more. He's got the Sahaquil into a Zeus, into a replaying of the Zeus, and still has a Scyther and a Bahamut. So actually, before I thought they might have all been run out, but no, it was hiding under the play points. There is another Scyther there. So Jay-Z actually might be out-resourcing Hacked Rock simply because of that Righteous Devil play.
Right. Still 2 evolution points, and at a glance, you can't really see any better value or use of them upcoming from the situation that Jay-Z's now put him into. I think just getting the Breath of the Salamander out from Jay-Z made no difference in the use of that Righteous Devil. I think he just really didn't want to commit anything large to the Star Phoenixes, but as a result, allowed them to just grind him out.
Right. And Hacked Rock's forced to play the Azazel now, just so that he can gain health. It's his only life gain option. Knows that there's a Zeus in hand. And he can actually clear board here if he wants. He might opt to clear the 4/4 and go face. I don't really see a lethal setup if he does that. So I don't think that's what he's going to do. Yeah, just playing the slow game.
Had he gone face...
Oh my goodness.
Had he actually gone face there, I think he actually would have had a lethal setup with the last evolution point with the next Emeralda.
Oh right, he has an Evo point.
Jay-Z didn't have healing.
That's right. So I would have opted for it. I mean, you know, that would have only been 9 damage total. There's no Evo points left over. Zeus would have consumed all the play points. So, I mean, eking out that one little bit of damage could have won in this game, because the best option this turn, again, is Jay-Z's Zeus to just deal 5 damage to face. But, of course, Jay-Z has to be worried about, you know, another removal spell, another Emeralda that will just finish him off. So maybe he's like, maybe this is the Bahamut time. I've got to do it. And I've got to just suck down another Emeralda. And then I can just play Zeus's to beat that afterwards.
I think it actually might come back to the idea that Hacked Rocks is actually playing a bit afraid here, because at a cursory glance, Jay-Z's list does not include anything like Forte or Genesis Dragon. The Zeus is all the damage he's going to be taking without an evolution point to back it up. So, not having that lethal... Well, had he gone for that anyways, Jay-Z's best response would have been being forced to play a Draconic Fervor to get out of lethal range. Then he would also need another answer for Azazel, in which case he would also have put himself far behind in deck advantage.
Right. So I think, yeah, I think that's the one little turn that Hacked Rocks... I think Hacked Rocks is still going to win this game. It's more just I think he could have won it sooner had he played a little bit differently. But playing the way he's playing is not wrong. It's still going back to what I said a long time ago. I know I have the win, and I'm going to play like I have it. The end. However, actually, never mind. Scratch that for a second with the second Zeus.
It's either he finds heal now, or some source of healing. He only needs 2. There's a lot in the deck. At this point, it's really difficult to actually keep track of what's left, even just a single Diabolic Drain or otherwise. But to do that, he's going to have to draw. And that throws away...
Oh, no.
That would throw away his deck advantage. Doesn't want to do that.
And Jay-Z wins. So, yeah, so technically the way Hacked Rocks played playing scared, getting rid of the Righteous Devil, and also not evoing for face damage to set up lethal, he kind of just threw the game away.
How?
Wow.
Why is Jay-Z so good at this game? I don't understand.
It's because it's the fear factor, man. People are afraid of him, and they make plays like playing Righteous Devils for no benefit.
I feel like one of the things that set him apart in both of these matches against Control Blood was the way that Jay-Z played out his hand. I feel like he just minimizes a few telegraphs that other players would pick up on, and also plays his options out very smartly such that he
Yes.
can procure a situation where he swings with Deathly Tyrant, where we see players playing around that all day. Jay-Z is the one who makes that swing happen, and also making sure that he has the appropriate options available. I mean, it really came down to a situation like Mofu talked about. You either draw out and lose in the card game, right, the card numbers game, or you open yourself up to Zeus Lethal, which is absolutely incredible.
It's absolutely incredible. I really think that the one change, I think that what I was saying holds true. Hackrox had that game in the bag. The Righteous Devil throwaway lost him the game. Like, regardless of all the plays after that, throwing the Righteous Devil away was simply saying, I'm not going to have that one resource I need to come back and win this game.
And eventually, that means Jay-Z took the win after a very long and grueling match. Let's take a look at Group B. Jay-Z will be 1-0, as expected of the player, and Hackrox 0-1. A good showing. Control Blood is definitely a difficult deck to play against, but not enough to defeat Jay-Z. And so the only match left now is Package versus Piao. And that'll be very interesting. I feel like this is one of those matches where you're going to see, again, Piao is this newer player to the actual season, and he has kind of a pet deck in Path to Purgatory. He's opted to bring it every single time, you know, and it's what he really brought that deck even when people weren't really thinking about it as much. I mean, there was a little talk about Path to Purgatory, but he really was like, I can win with this, and he did. And we'll look at these deck lists here, and maybe you can provide some insight for Care Package's preparation here a little bit. He's got Dragoncraft and Runecraft with his blood banned out here, and Piao having the Forest, which I'm going to assume is PTP, and then banned Rune, and then running Shadow here. Do you think Care Package understands how to navigate this matchup? Is he going to try to fight out against the Path to Purgatory deck, or is he going to try to figure out how to play out a way against Shadow, or do you think his lineups are more general speaking and not really targeting either deck?
I think Care Package's decks are actually perfect for this matchup. So PTP can eke out a win. I mean, it always has the possibility. It's a combo deck. It can beat control decks. It can beat slower decks. It has that possibility. Now, mid-Shadow, where I would say is usually one of the most fundamentally good decks to bring to a tournament, against D-Shift and Ramp Dragon, it doesn't feel so good anymore. It doesn't have the aggro to beat D-Shift fast enough, and it really doesn't have the late game to beat Dragon if Dragon just pumps out, you know, Bahamut's after Bahamut's after Bahamut's and things like that. So I think Care Package is in a good spot here.
And one of the things that I want to talk about Care Package's list, which I think is very interesting and still a very good card, albeit a little more niche now after its changes, is the Dragoncraft deck with Ouroboros in it, which used to be a mainstay of that Ramp Dragon, where they removed the healing effect. It used to heal as well when it was destroyed. Now that's gone, but still a very key card in certain matchups. I think one specifically would be the Dragon Mirror. But as you said, against Shadow, if there's this kind of repeating threat of something coming down, Shadow can be burned out. What do you think about Ouroboros, Mofu, and kind of what are its strengths? How does it apply in this deck? Where would you opt to include it? Why would you opt to exclude it?
So I think the main thing about Ouroboros is that it's very rare for a card to be able to recur as a threat that your opponent has to deal with every single turn. There's not cards that do that very much. We actually saw something like Jay-Z turning Star Phoenixes into Ouroboroses that last game. But in a deck like this, I think what Care Package is doing is he wants range. He wants all kinds of win conditions. He wants a little bit of everything, and that's why you see him running so many cards as one-ofs, in that if he gets to his endgame, he's going to find something that progresses his game plan. But he wants to be able to keep his opponent guessing. It's very hard to play around when you don't know if you're going to have to deal with an Ouroboros eventually, or just a Polyphonic Roar or an Israfil. What's it going to be? And he's willing to play a game where he doesn't know where he's going to get either, in order to keep his opponent guessing.
And of course that Queen of the Dread Sea thrown in there, and there's a few good Storm options that he can kind of combo with it, as well as just kind of installing some very important cards, right? Polyphonic Roar is a popular card to actually combo with that Dread Sea, just because you can get so much advantage on the following turns after dropping it. So there's a few options here. What do you think about this list in particular? Because it's a little bit different, right, than some of the other Dragoncraft lists that we've seen, Exo.
Well, it's exactly what Mofu and I were talking about a little bit earlier. Actually, maybe this was yesterday that we were talking about why play one-ofs in your deck, and Mofu defined it quite aptly in you keep your opponent guessing. We see how the dragon endgame plays out. The only important thing really is Bahamut. Outside of that, it's how do you force through different situations? How do you get a couple points of extra damage in? How do you play around certain things? And when you give yourself every single option, it can make it a lot easier to just kind of push through things that your opponent wasn't expecting.
So we'll see if Care Package can make it happen. And I think there's a lot of kind of growth for Care Package as well. You know, Season 2, he fought out against a lot of very difficult opponents and put himself into a lot of very tough situations. But I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there, right? And he's kind of more seasoned now. And I feel like this particular season of the Shadowverse Open is kind of his to take. You know, I think there's a lot of smart deck building lessons that he's kind of picked up on, and every time we see him, it seems like he gets a little bit sharper, a little bit sharper, and a little bit sharper, and so.
Plus, he's dressed for business today. Did you see him with his nice little suit jacket on? He's ready to go.
I was staring at him the whole time, actually.
Wow. What the? Okay, I need to up my game. I can't have Mofu looking at other people. Wait a minute.
Oh no.
Oh, no. This is
Jealousy.
not good.
It's okay, Rainy.
It's not becoming Rainy.
You know what? I can't do this anymore. I have to talk about it, Mofu. This working environment does not work for us. We can't work together. This is not okay.
No. You'll still buy my leader package, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the good.
Yeah, that'll be fine. So, I mean, we're gonna get the match rolling here, but last match of the day, Piao versus Care Package. And Exo, you think his lists are going to be pretty good against Piao? Do you agree, Mofu? Do you feel like Care Package is kind of geared up to win here, or do you think that Piao has a good fighting chance? I mean, I feel like PTP is becoming one of those decks that's kind of, you know, you have this very good aggressive game plan, especially with the inclusion of things like Elf Song and how good tokens are now. And then that PTP late game is just so dangerous, as we've seen before. How do you feel about the list?
I think I wouldn't discount Care Package at all, but I actually thought that Piao might have a pretty decent advantage here, because Piao, his specialty is something that Care Package is trying to do, which is Piao is really hard to predict. I think, though we know what PTP Forest is, Piao showed up, and he just said, wait, no you don't. And he came in with a list that is like nothing anyone has ever seen before or tried to make work, and just suddenly made it happen. So I think that this is going to be a pretty tough match to call. Two players who are doing very, very strange things. But for the most part, I think Piao is fine. I think this is his natural way to play, and I think he could handle this.
Well, we'll just have to see. And, you know, one of the players that was most talked about, and a lot of people, I think, really were inspired by Piao's lists and the things that he brought. So we'll see how he does here, and it's going to kick off with Runecraft versus Forest, which is going to be interesting. I think PTP can be aggressive enough. I mean, it's really tough because they play a lot of followers, which means you spell boost a lot. How do you feel about this match, Exo?
Well, this all comes down to if Piao can actually be the aggressor here. If he can't, D-Shift will run over the late game PTP side of things. It's just not going to happen. So, aggro or no. Piao's shown that he knows how to do it, and he's definitely mulliganing for it. What do you think, Mofu?
Now, I think you already expressed it, but this is the most interesting thing about Piao's list. Usually, the approach most people took to making PTP Forest back in the day was they just simply install it as a part of Control or Tempo Forest. What Piao has done is he's made this sort of aggro forest list that then transitions all the shadows it makes with the tokens and otherwise into a PTP game plan if he needs it. So as you said, it's all gonna hinge on that. Can he actually make enough use of the aggro side of things to beat a deck as consistent and tough to handle as D-Shift?
That's right. And what's funny is Care Package is even going more anti-aggro than we see most D-Shift players with a Scrap Iron Smelter. Normally we see Commence Experiment for the spell boost, but he values the ward and staving off some damage early as paramount, and it's showing here. Saving even just 1 point of damage can mean an extra turn or not.
Yeah, I actually lost to it this morning. My D-Shift list with like 2 of these. It also happened to do with not drawing D-Shift. But that aside from the point, I think it's a really, really cool option that players have opted into.
Piao, I want to say, is more consistent than anyone I've ever seen to actually pulling off Elf Song on turn 4 as well. He's really good at doing that.
I've noticed, like, it really just comes down to drawing the 1-drops and drawing 1-drop generators. It's not too hard to get it off. It's something like a Fairy Circle gives you the pieces to get it on turn 4, but where it really shines is when you can get it on turn 4 when you already had a board. I think that's the kind of spot we're looking at here.
I don't know if you missed it, but Piao's sending everyone hearts on his cam. So, props to Piao. Hearts back, friend. Care package correctly identifying that he needs to clear board on turn 4 so that Elf Song isn't as big of a deal.
Right. Threw out more or less the entire package of removal he had. Minimizes the amount of pressure Piao can put out with his early board, but I think there's always the sort of issue for D-Shift where you commit all the pieces you have to getting rid of your opponent's early aggression, but if you don't have a D-Shift in hand yet, finds one really fortunately off of Merlin.
Yes.
Those things like Wind Blasts and Angelic Snipes don't get added to it, so your opponent doesn't really know how to read this, but maybe just like 1 turn or 2 turns, your D-Shift has already been delayed.
Right. I do feel like this is one matchup, though, where Golem Assault plus Chimera turns can actually win the game, because Forest doesn't really have a lot of ways to push through that type of a board state, other than the PTP, but if Piao doesn't like plan for that to happen, then he might not be anywhere close to PTP by the time something like that does happen.
So, funnily enough, I think both players have more or less gotten to their points of transition pretty quickly. I'm surprised to see this Fairy. I'm surprised to see this commitment of Fairies, actually. I had thought for a second that he was going to try to hold the Fairies from the Brambles and get a huge Shadow boost off of Altered Fate. It looks like he just wants to elect to keep the board as huge as possible the entire game.
Yep, and I think that's perfectly appropriate. Like we said, the PTP option is available, but against D-Shift, it's not your main goal. You just want to keep the presence going. And realistically, if you keep a board that's bigger than 1/1s with Forest, you can actually negate a lot of things that Rune can do to you with magic missiles and angelic snipes and things like that. So making the board wide basically presents to D-Shift every single turn you have to deal with all of this stuff, not just one big follower at a time.
May not be too tough for Care Package. He's been working on a Chimera for a while, has a magic missile. I think one of the main weaknesses of Forest, even in aggro shells, is if you don't run the Apuria package and other cards like that that push a lot of damage in the mid-late game, then it's difficult to really find that from the PTP version of it. Because
Absolutely.
here, if he Altered Fates, it slows his turn down a little bit.
Exactly, and you don't have that same push of damage because you're also not playing things like, Beetle Warrior, sometimes we've been seeing, or, Blessed Fairy Dancer to even push Elf Song boards even bigger, things like that. It's a very consistent way of generating fairies, but once that early aggression is dealt with, that first Earth Song board is dealt with, and things like that, it's a lot easier to manage the damage that comes out of this deck.
But that said, do you think this turn, especially after he draws a Rhino, do you think this turn's going to be an Altered Fate turn? Is he looking for more options, or is he just going to continue to refill and say that this board is all he needs?
And this is tough. This might be Fairy Fairy Roach just to push as much damage as possible. It sucks that Wood of Brambles is still in play. He'd rather be able to play more fairies, of course, for extra Roach damage. I don't think he can afford to really Altered Fate and find anything better than Roach damage at the moment.
Honestly, at the very best, he could have Altered Fated into another Roach and added that to a part of that Roach's damage.
That's
He's
true.
going to do the best he can with it. Airbound Barrage actually saves this Roach from the board if he wants to hold on to it.
I really like that. He can also save Wood of Brambles just to have more value going into the next turns, just to never have an empty board. But it's opts for the Roach, which is definitely not a bad call. As a matter of fact, 1, 2, yeah.
That's checkmate, isn't it?
That might be checkmate, actually. Finding the bounce there might have been checkmate.
Right. If he didn't have a bounce, he didn't find the reach otherwise. I think when you Altered Fate a small hand, that's dead end for PTP. You're not going to get PTP off that game when that sort of situation arises. And Care Package, even though he had extra wards packed in here, in the case of like Scrap Iron, it's just not enough to mitigate mid-game damage if an opponent isn't taken or pressured off the board at all.
Let's see, so 1, 2, and then I'll have 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 2 other spells. 1, 2, 3, 4. He has exact lethal, even if this board gets cleared up. Yep, and there are no wards in sight for Care Package, and he's not winning this turn, so Piao managed to eke out a victory with a small Altered Fate into a bounce with his final play point to get that Roach back in hand, and finds ways of filling up his hand with Fairy Whisperer as well. Also necessary. There needed to be a Fairy Generator card in his hand to make it work as well. So finds exactly what he needed.
I think that also, aside from how fortunate this hand was to find, it plays into a bit of what we talked about of Altered Fate as a card, in that you don't really see Altered Fate. Well, there's an Nature's Guidance, and that's really fortunate too, in case he didn't have one of those things. But we mentioned Altered Fate's kind of like a card where you use it not only just to generate shadows for PTP or progress a game plan like Wild Flying Dragonute, but you can also use it to shuffle in things for different options. You can get rid of a bunch of fairies and toss them for things like a bounce for Roach. He runs 3 Nature's Guidances and 3 Airbound Barrages, and he used Altered Fate that way. I think it's just such a cool card when you get to see it have that kind of utility in a matchup like this.
Absolutely. Being able to go complete aggro to complete like board control into late game PTP, and Altered Fate being able to be used both ways, very awesome. And I think that's why Piao built the deck the way that he did. And the way the thing that I'm saying is PTP is his end of curve. So at 4 play points, PTP is it. Beyond that, he's playing cards that cost less, 1 or 2. And that's pretty much his entire deck. So I just think it's really cool the way this deck plays out.
He even plays 1 copy of Pixie Mischief. We didn't see it, but I think that game in particular showed me something about the deck I never would have actually seen on my own. And how useful is Altered Fate for Roach?
Right? Finding that extra little oomph that you need. But we said before the match, or at least I said before the match, that PTP can always eke out a win. This is the matchup that I think Piao is going to suffer with. I don't know if I mean, it's not terrible, right? It's mid-shadow. But I think that this is his weaker of the 2 decks, and I think that D-Shift and Ramp Dragon can beat this deck sort of easily.
Right. Really, I can't contest that one, because the matchup versus Ramp Dragon, I don't think has ever really proved that good for Mid-Shadow in any degree, because Ramp Dragon just pushes and shrugs off everything that Mid-Shadow is usually capable of doing, and D-Shift, I would say, would not usually have a good matchup against Piao if not for how fast this deck has actually become.
Right. However, we do see Care Package not quite drawing into either D-Shift or Giant Chimera again in his opener, so we'll have to find it out with Merlin or hope to draw it soon here.
Especially unfortunate is being left with very little to do on turn 3. It never really feels good to have to use a sorcery cache on something like Fate's Hand, so maybe he just concentrates, which is very slow against an opponent.
I don't mind to concentrate here. It gives you the best opportunity to actually get the D-Shift in your hand immediately. You don't get the extra life or the extra card out of it, but, you know, Altered Fading on turn 3 isn't the worst thing you could be doing. Looks like he opts for the cash, though.
Right. I think one part of it is going for concentration there raises his hand size to, I think, 8 after he draws next turn. And then he can't really Merlin and Evolve her if he doesn't find the D-Shift off of it. So he opts to try to not nil as long as he doesn't have things like D-Shift in his hand.
Right, and it looks like he's sort cashed, if I can see it properly, the Chimera, which I like. Gives him a better mid-game option as he starts spell boosting here.
So this is probably the best position we're going to see Piao in. I think as Care Package starts to draw into his combo, it's just going to be a ticking clock for Piao to actually find the damage to finish this off.
Also, we haven't really seen Care Package draw into like double Chimeras. He's been drawing pretty clunky hands, like tons of Merlins, is what I've been seeing, essentially. Lots and lots of Merlins.
Funnily enough, I think he's drawn both Merlins both games, or at least he's been a pretty star player. Last game, even though he didn't exactly win that one, she did do him the favor of drawing him a D-Shift, which he probably really desperately wants to happen right now.
Right. Let's get it there, maybe on the Evo. This will lock him out of a draw next turn.
More or less has to be D-Shift, I think.
Ooh.
I think he's in a really bad position from not getting D-Shift off of that Merlin.
And this is actually one of the downsides of playing Scrap Iron Smelter. So maybe he could have had an option to play, you know, if that was a Commence Experiment instead, into, you know, Fate's Hand, into just drawing more cards and having more action. The Scrap Iron Smelter kind of hurts in some scenarios because it doesn't spell boost.
It's so tough to kind of make that call on it as well of whether or not Scrap Iron Scarecrow deserves the slot, because one of the biggest questions of D-Shift is how do I build this to make it handle tough matchups like aggro? How do I make it have tools that help me defend against mid-range threats, especially those like Storms? And it's really attractive to go for every ward you can like that when cards are so similar as Commence Experiment and Scrap Iron Golem. Not to name a Yu-Gi-Oh card there, but I think one of the biggest appeals of Commence Experiment is that one-cost spells are so useful in D-Shift, they can completely turn entire situations of bad hands into good ones. And we'd see that here if he had that. But the 0-2 ward is not going to have that same value for him.
Right, it's also one of those plays that actually makes Merlin really awesome on turn 5. You get to Evo, you get to fill up your hand, you get to then spell boost everything in your hand and then drop down below max hand size. But as it stands, I mean, these Fiery Embraces and, you know, Wind Blast and things like that are good cards, but against, you know, just the small, tiny skeletons of Shadow, you realistically just want to be going for your combo, and Care Package is not able to find it yet. I feel like this is a Scrap Iron, Smelter, and Merlin only. I think that's what you have to do. I think you have to finally try to get your D-Shift in hand and just pray.
Right, and even that just commits him to finding 2 more spell boosts. He actually is going to go for the more reactive play here in the Chimera, but spending an entire turn not cycling, not looking for his D-Shift is just... It might lead to a slight tempo swing this turn that doesn't end up mattering at all to Piao's game plan.
Right. And I think this actually, without spell boosting, without doing anything to accelerate his game plan, this is the big swing turn. Of course, we can see it in play as well, but I don't know how Care Package actually comes back from this. And Piao's feeling it right now. Piao is feeling it. It's just an unfortunate circumstance for Care Package, just not finding the things that he would like to do with his D-Shift deck early here in both games.
I'm actually now noticing also that he drew a Commence Experiment. He actually only plays 1 Scrap Iron Smelter. Perhaps just there as a side-in for the 3rd copy. Perhaps he just wanted that little extra defensive option. But I'm thinking that's actually the difference it makes. I think this hand could have ended up a lot faster if he had a 1-cost option in it beforehand.
Yep. That's all it takes with D-Shift, honestly. I mean, you have high-cost spells and you have low-cost spells. If any of those interactions don't happen properly, it can set you back a turn. We saw Care Package actually get set back 2 turns this game. Now he's able to speed up again. He just drew his Owl. He's not he's not dead here by any means, but just a lot slower than we'd like, and still no D-Shift in hand. And honestly, no Giant Chimera either. So he's gonna have to find value in other ways this game.
I feel so bad for him, to be completely honest, because I know this feeling. I've had this happen many times in a row. He's 17 cards into his deck. He hasn't developed a win condition. And at this point, when you have to make that decision as a D-Shift player that you're not playing for your combo anymore, that's when a game can become really hectic to navigate. In fact, you see the full commitment of his removal here to just try to get damage. Perhaps even just trying to put it in Piao's head that he has to clear it. Perhaps like saying, I have a D-Shift, it's ready. I definitely do.
I actually love this line. This line says, alright, I am the proactive player now. I have a ward left to back up what I'm doing. I have more card draw to fuel. And maybe I can just eke out a win by protecting the 6-5. Maybe it's possible.
I think really the biggest part of it too is there's so much mystery behind that. Like, what is he saying? What is he telling Piao? Like,
right.
Though behind this there's really no backup. He doesn't run aggressive spells that some D-Shift lists used to, like Piercing or otherwise. It's going to be hard to find that damage. But if he went so confidently and dumped so much of his hand for that single hit face, I think Piao has to play around the possibility that Care Package actually has an active D-Shift.
Right. And I think that's exactly what Care Package was thinking. He's like, you know what, I can't clear board, but what if I trick my opponent into clearing it for me? And you can see Piao's got that decision right staring him in the face. He's like, man, do I respect it? Do I not?
He's put Piao in such a tough spot here with that. It's like, to be honest, I think I haven't really seen any other deck in Shadowverse or many archetypes at all lead to situations like this where you can make such intense and important bluffs.
And as we see, removal spell used, all damage being used to clear, shadows being used on the Blade Fiend. Not a bad ending state for where Care Package was. Like, he was looking like he was just straight up out of the game, but after a turn of events, you know, he's right back in it.
He managed to bluff his way back into it because he would have been absolutely slaughtered if Piao just called the bluff and played Thane, but
Yep.
way too endangered to do something like that against a deck like D-Shift.
Right, and now we're actually getting to a point in the game where we're getting to the cards that I was talking about with Golem Assault into an end game. He doesn't have a Chimera to back it up or any extra followers, but he does draw his D-Shift now. So if he can manage the next couple turns, which is going to be hard, especially backed up by a Thane, he might be able to squeak away with this one.
Mm-hmm. Although it is really unfortunate to draw D-Shift so late into one's deck, one of the saving graces of it is usually by this time you have a lot of spell boosted cards, a lot of low cost spells in hand. It only really takes about 2 turns to set one up after drawing one.
And again, getting great use out of that Scrap Iron Smelter, preventing all face damage this turn.
Mm-hmm. Even just an increment of 3 could be a really big deal, because that could have been a Commence Experiment.
Really excited to see how Care Package finishes this up if he can. Because now we're looming Ektar every single turn. This Thane in play is going to get some damage dealt. And there's a lot of toughness on the board, and all the Fiery Embraces have been used.
Right.
If anything, this game, the only thing that maybe I could have changed if I was Care Package is not using that second Fiery Embrace on a 1-1 and saving it for another turn, because it was already at 0.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good call. If anything, maybe he just dumped it all because he wanted to really convince Piao that he had it, but not having it here is really gonna bite.
Yes.
I think he can navigate this just carefully enough so that he's not threatened lethal by the Ictor. But it's gonna be tough. He doesn't really have a big reactive play until the Chimera, which is very far from being able to play.
Right, and Chimera unfortunately not able to actually just hard clear any of these X5s.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't opt to go for the full-on Golem Assault, so maybe opting for just the cheaper version to get more spells played this turn.
Mm-hmm. With it costing 1, he does actually get full value from this Wind Blast. He can clear anything he likes. Needs just a little bit of damage in order to accept Thane staying on the board with the white.
And this is
3
lethal.
3 body. Right.
Yep, this is just over lethal. Ektar doing his famous "I'm gonna clear your board" while overrunning the rest of my board, and you're gonna take lethal damage. So Piao is gonna take this match. Care Package, D-Shift, not your friend. Sorry, my friend.
There it is. Piao will take the win, and again, demonstrating his prowess in the competitive scene. Care Package taking a loss. I actually forgot to mention, Care Package is part of Dawnbreakers now. Shadow Nexus has said that.
So we are a loving community of people, and Care Package is still a part of that community, but we have dissolved our competitive side, as we talked about in previous weeks, because we are no longer really a competitive team.
And so now they just run tournaments, run events, and share the good word that is Shadowverse.
That's right.
That's what they do. The Shadow Nexus. That's a very ominous name for an organization that does.
Well, Shadowverse is the game. Nexus is just, you know, a collection and or an aggregation of people. So, you know.
The Shadow Nexus sounds like an evil building you would go to.
It definitely sounds like a building gathering. Like, you can't dodge that.
All right, I believe we have an interview lined up with the winner of the match, Piao. And we're going to get to talk to him a little bit and see what he has to say. How are you, my good friend?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Piao, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where you come from, what do you do, how'd you get into Shadowverse?
Yeah, actually, I'm a living host in China. Yeah, but I'm a graduate student in the US now.
Great.
Yeah.
What do you study?
Yeah. I'm studying MBA.
Oh, ooh,
Yeah.
MBA. Wow.
Yeah.
You must that That's why you can play Shadowverse. Your math must be incredibly good. A very smart individual. How'd you get into playing Shadowverse in card games?
Yeah, I really love card games. I used to play Hearthstone and UGO. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
play them kind of competitively? Did you ever go to tournaments and whatnot? Or is kind of Shadowverse your first time doing that in a competitive
Yeah. Actually, Shadowverse is my first time to doing some match and do the host. Yeah.
Awesome. How is the card gaming scene? Because you said you're kind of studying abroad here in the United States. How is that in China? Did you ever kind of find places to play card games in China, or is it mostly just playing in the United States?
Yeah. Actually, Shadowverse is becoming a fashion game in China, and there are a lot of fans. And yeah. Firstly, I have to say I love my fans, and some fans stay night out in China to watch my match now.
Nice.
So,
They're
thank
watching
you,
right
guys.
now?
Yeah.
From China?
Yeah.
Oh man, would you like to give them a message, your adoring fans?
I love you guys.
Oh, that's so cool. What does out of curiosity JAS? So I'm assuming Piao is kind of your name.
Yeah.
JAS, what is that?
It's a team name because the captain of our team named Jasmine.
Nice.
So yeah, Jazz is a sub of her name.
Cool.
Yeah. She's a women player, so she's so cute.
Great. That's awesome actually. So would you say kind of, as Shadowverse is becoming more popular, is JAS kind of a big team? Are they looking to compete more? Are they looking forward to events like the World Grand Prix? And I think you got pretty close, is that right? To qualifying for the World Grand Prix? How do you feel? Do you think you'll be at Japan at that time to kind of watch and attend the event? Or
yeah, I really want to do that, but I can't. But another Chinese player, Mio, Mio,
Yeah.
Mio 944.
Yes.
He can be there, so I congratulate to him.
That's awesome.
And
Did you know Meow before, or just knew each other because he...
I knew him because this match.
I see.
Yeah, but he played really good.
Great. That's so cool. Well, is there anything that you would like to say to your adoring fans or kind of other people, or anything like last words that you want to give or shout outs to your team?
Well, I will play PTP forever.
That's actually a great question. Why do you love PTP so much? How did that come to be?
Yeah, I used to play PTP Run on WLD on August, maybe for more than 20,000 meta points for PTP Run. This is a good card, good deck to counter mid shadow actually.
Oh wow.
And yeah.
Wow.
And I love this shift.
Nice. Well, you're doing super well. Really great to see somebody from China also doing really well, and I'm glad that you're kind of in the season and kicking some Shadowverse butt. And so great to talk to you. Good luck for the rest of the season, and hope to see you at the World Grand Prix if you can magically free up your time, and looking forward to seeing more of you and your teammates. So thanks so much, Piao. That was just a quick word with the player, the man behind Path to Purgatory. And he's definitely showing people how to make it work. I know a lot of people were kind of hoping, please, Path to Purgatory Forest, come back. But he played both PTP Forest and PTP Rune, so he's a learned PTP player.
What else can you say? If you can do something that other people can't with something that's been around since the dawn of Shadowverse, more power to you.
Well, let's take a look at the standings for the groups, see how we're ending the day. Over on Group B, it's going to be Jay-Z, Piao, and Underwear up there. 1 and 0 is their scoreline. Meanwhile, Vetu, Care Package, and Hacked Rocks have a little bit of a slower start, 0-1 each. And of course, a recap of Group A. Red, Epiclus, and Fantasy are up ahead, and Bottles, Gengar, and Lest are going to be left behind for one more week. But next week, everything is going to go a little more crazy. Who's going to be 2-0? Who's going to be 1-1? And who's going to be 0-2? We'll have to see. I think these groups are shaking up to be. I feel like it's a good mix, right? It's a good mix of the expected champions, but also kind of there's this underlying kind of rockingness of things are shifting.
There's some new players that are looking very good this season. Piao, of course, being one of them. Payne from the other side, Meow944. Like, we've got a lot of great players coming into this season.
So, any final thoughts about the competition we've seen today? Felt very different than the EU round robin. It felt incredibly different pace and slightly different decks that were being brought to the forefront. How'd you feel about the competition today?
Competition today is amazing. Like, minor adjustments in certain turns. Other than that, everybody played very well today. Like, I was impressed with everybody's lines, like how they were thinking about their turns, how they used their Evo points, the deck selection. I think maybe only one ban might have been changed outside of that. I mean, today was great. I loved watching today's games.
Yeah, I noticed that too, actually. Unlike you before, where we did see sometimes players maybe not adjusting too much to the people they're playing against, maybe some players trying out new stuff. NA feels like we have a lot of players that just know what they're doing, they know what they want to do, and they come in, they play fast, they play precisely. It's just all really smooth for them.
And certainly that's been one of the kind of staying points, identifying points of North America, even when they do tend to play their control lineups. But
that's right. That's especially right. Our matchups could be going hours, but they're not, because the players know what they want to do on their turns.
So that'll wrap up the first week of North America. Some very, very fun games that we watched today, and we got a good talk with some of the players here, and we talked about Shadowverse Next. So thank you to all the players who kind of put time in and learn the game and compete and provide us such entertaining games. If you want more information about Shadowverse events, about broadcasts, about the tournament, about maybe the players, just about anything Shadowverse in general, @Shadowverse Game is your social media channel to follow. Make sure to give that Twitter a follow. Definitely do it, because it'll tell you all the stuff. If you want to stay up to date about things like Shadowverse Next, if you missed it and you're kind of like, oh, it came out at 3 a.m., I didn't know it was coming, follow the Twitter account, because it would have told you. Also, shadowverse.nge.io is where you get information about this tournament. Also, there's about some cool articles about competitive Shadowverse just in general, decks and kind of things that the players do and kind of approaching the competitive mentality, all that interesting stuff, as well as information about the broadcast. So make sure to go to the website and check that out. And if you do that, all three of us would be very happy people. We would all be very, very happy and smiling. Also, if you're on social, you should talk to us.
Say hi, give us little beat boops, and tell us how you're doing.
I believe that's Exodium TV on Twitter, and that's Mofu Mocha. Is that it? It's just @MofuMocha.
That's it. Not to be confused with Mocha Mofu. That person is not me. He's an imposter.
Go to @MochaMofu and give Mocha Mofu a follow.
Wrong.
And then nobody cares about me, so you don't need to know that. But we've had a great day. I've had a lot of fun. Next week, we are going to continue with week 2 of the round robin for both EU and NA. Who knows what's going to happen? I have no idea. Things are going to shake up, and we draw ever closer to the World Grand Prix. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Make sure to come back next week. And from myself, Exodium, and Mofu, have a good day and a good evening.